It started as one of those small-town Halloween nights that felt almost too quiet, like the calm that comes before a storm. The sky over Ridgefield, Ohio was overcast, the moon barely showing through the clouds, and the air had that damp chill that sank deep into your bones. Every house on Maple Drive was decked out with orange lights, fake cobwebs, skeletons on porches, and bowls of candy sitting out for the kids. My name is Mark Jennings. Back then, I was 23, living in my hometown again after finishing college. I worked part-time at a hardware store while saving money to move out of my parents' place. I wasn't big on Halloween anymore, but that year my friends talked me into going to a party hosted by someone I hadn't seen in years, an old classmate named Jake Miller. Jake had been the kind of guy who threw wild parties even in high school. He'd inherited this old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, about 5 miles past the ridge, surrounded by empty fields and thick woods. I'd heard the place used to belong to his grandparents before they passed away, and Jake had been living there ever since. He called it the Miller House, though most of us knew it as the Halloween House, because every year he threw some big themed party out there. That Halloween night, I drove out with my friend Lindsay in her car, a red '09 Civic with a broken headlight. She was the kind of person who lived for nights like that, where she could dress up and drink cheap beer around a bonfire. I was just along for the ride, half because she guilted me into it, and half because I didn't want to sit at home while everyone else was out. As we turned off the main road, the landscape grew darker. There were no street lights, just the long dirt road winding between bare trees, their branches arching overhead like bony fingers. I remember how quiet it got when we turned down that last stretch. No cars behind us, no wind, just the sound of gravel crunching under the tires. When we finally saw the farmhouse, it looked like something out of an old movie. The house sat on a small hill, pale yellow paint peeling off the sides, with a sagging porch and a single flickering light by the door. Pumpkins lined the steps, some carved, some collapsed from rot. The yard was full of people in costumes. Witches, zombies, vampires, the usual, and I could already smell the beer and bonfire smoke drifting in the cold air. We parked along the fence and walked up the hill. Jake was standing near the fire pit, wearing a cheap devil mask and holding a beer. When he saw us, he waved. "Mark Jennings, man, I thought you moved away for good," he said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like whiskey and smoke. "Glad you made it out. Tonight's going to be legendary." I laughed it off, told him it was good to see him. Lindsay was already mingling with a few people from our high school. Most of them were drunk, laughing too loud, their faces glowing orange in the firelight. The party itself was typical. Music from a Bluetooth speaker, cheap beer in red cups, and that nervous kind of excitement people get when they think they might see something crazy before the night's over. But there was something weird about the place. The farmhouse had this heaviness to it, like the air inside was thicker than it should have been. When I went in to grab a drink, the lights flickered constantly, and the old wallpaper was stained in a way that made it look like faces were pushing out from behind it. I chalked it up to the lighting and the beer. Around 11, people started talking about the story. Every Halloween, Jake would tell it. Some made-up ghost story about his grandparents' house being haunted. I didn't think much of it until he called everyone inside. "All right, everyone," Jake said, standing in the middle of the living room. "You all know what time it is. The Miller House tradition." He turned off the lights, and the only illumination came from the jack-o'-lanterns in the corners. The fire crackled faintly through the open door, and people gathered around him, whispering and laughing. Jake started slow. "So, for those who don't know, this house isn't just old. It's weird. My grandparents moved here in the 50s. My granddad was a doctor, a coroner, actually. He used to work out of the house back before the county had a proper morgue." A few people groaned, saying, "Come on, dude, not this again." But Jake smiled. No, it's true. He used to bring bodies here sometimes, worked out of the basement. My mom said he'd be down there all night, embalming, doing autopsies, whatever. She said the basement always smelled like formaldehyde. Someone laughed nervously. "So you're saying your granddad had dead bodies down there?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, and when he died in '83, my grandma started acting strange. Said she could hear voices in the floorboards. said she'd see people walking in the fields late at night, people that weren't really there. Someone in the back muttered, "Bullshit," but the room had gone quieter. Jake leaned closer, lowering his voice. The story goes, one Halloween night, my grandma went missing. Cops searched the woods for days, never found her, but my mom swore she heard footsteps in the kitchen that same night, hours after Grandma disappeared. Said when she went downstairs, all the cabinet doors were open and there was mud all over the floor, like someone had walked in from outside. The room was still. The music outside had stopped, and even the fire sounded distant. Jake smiled again. Anyway, happy Halloween. Everyone laughed it off, but there was an unease that lingered. People went back outside, but you could tell the story stuck in their heads. Around midnight, the power went out. It wasn't sudden. It flickered once, twice, and then the entire house went dark. Someone screamed, thinking it was part of the show, but Jake looked genuinely confused. "It's not me," he said. "Breaker's old. Probably tripped." The music cut out. The fire outside burned low. Someone shined their phone light back, and we all followed Jake toward the basement door. The air down there was colder. It smelled like mildew and dust, but underneath that was something else. Something chemical. Jake found the breaker box and flipped a few switches, but nothing happened. While he worked on it, my phone light caught something in the corner. It was a metal table covered by an old white sheet. Beside it, a row of glass jars lined a wooden shelf. Most were empty, but a few still had cloudy liquid inside. Something floated in one of them, something small and pale. "Jesus," I muttered. Jake glanced over. "Yeah, my granddad's stuff. I've been meaning to clear this out." Lindsay whispered behind me, "It feels like someone's down here." I laughed nervously, but when I looked at her, she wasn't smiling. Her eyes were fixed on the far wall. There was a shadow there that didn't seem to belong to anyone. It was faint, but it moved, like it was breathing. The power came back suddenly, the lights flashing so bright it made us all jump. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. We all went back upstairs, shaking it off as the night got colder. By 1 a.m, half the people had left. The fire was dying, and the wind picked up, howling across the empty fields. That's when Lindsay realized her car keys were gone. We searched everywhere, the table, the porch, the ground near the car, but they weren't there. She swore she'd had them in her jacket pocket. I offered to help her check inside the house one last time. When we went back in, the music and voices outside faded, like we were stepping into a vacuum. The house felt wrong. The lights were dim, flickering again. We split up. She went to check the kitchen while I went upstairs. The stairs creaked under every step, and I remember how the hallway smelled like something rotten. I checked the guest room first, then the small study. Nothing. But when I opened the last door at the end of the hall, the one I thought led to a closet, I saw a narrow staircase leading up to the attic. Something told me not to go up there. But I heard movement above, soft, dragging footsteps, and I thought maybe Lindsay had gone up there. I called her name. No answer. So I climbed. The attic was colder than outside. My breath came out white in the air. There were boxes everywhere, covered in dust and spiderwebs. A single window looked out over the fields, and the moon had come out just enough to cast a pale light across the floor. Then I saw it. A set of muddy footprints leading from the window toward the center of the attic. Small footprints. Bare feet. At first, I thought maybe some animal had gotten in, but the prints were too human, too perfect, and they stopped abruptly in the middle of the room. I stood there, listening. The air was so still that when something whispered my name, soft and wet, I thought it came from inside my own head. "Mark." I turned. Nothing. Then I heard it again, right next to my ear. "Mark." I spun around and hit something solid, something cold. For a split second in the dim light, I saw what looked like a woman's face inches from mine, skin gray and tight, eyes black and sunken. Her mouth opened like she was trying to breathe, and I smelled that same chemical, formaldehyde stench. I fell backward, hit the floor, and scrambled toward the stairs. When I looked up, the attic was empty again. I didn't wait. I ran downstairs yelling for Lindsay. She came out of the kitchen, pale, shaking. "Mark, someone's in the house." "What?" I saw a woman, an old woman, standing by the back door. I thought it was someone from the party, but she didn't move right. She just stood there watching me. Then she smiled and disappeared. We both ran outside. Most of the guests were gone. Jake was sitting near the fire with two other guys, drunk and half asleep. We told him what happened, but he just laughed. Man, that's the spirit of Grandma Miller. She likes new faces. I didn't laugh. Lindsay grabbed my arm. We're not staying here. Let's go. Jake offered to drive us, but his truck wouldn't start. We were stranded until someone else could give us a ride. The wind howled louder, and the fields looked endless in the moonlight. Around 2 a.m., we decided to wait in the house. The cold was getting unbearable. Jake passed out on the couch, and the others went to sleep upstairs. Lindsay and I sat in the living room with a single lamp on. Every few minutes, I'd hear something moving in the walls, soft scratching, then silence. She eventually dozed off beside me. I must have drifted too, because the next thing I remember was waking up to complete darkness. The lamp had gone out again. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Jake? I called. No response. The footsteps came closer, and I saw a faint light, like the glow of a candle, moving past the doorway. Then I heard whispering. It was faint at first, but it grew clearer. Help! Me! It came from the basement. I looked around, but Lindsay was still asleep. I didn't want to wake her. I thought maybe someone had fallen or was messing around. So I grabbed my phone for light and went toward the basement door. When I opened it, the smell hit me. Rot, chemicals, and something else. Metallic. The whispering stopped. I took a few steps down, shining my light. The basement looked the same as before, but there was something new, muddy footprints leading from the stairs toward the metal table. They stopped at the sheet-covered shape. The sheet moved, just slightly. I froze. Then, slowly, something sat up beneath it, the outline of a head, shoulders, and then, in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater, I heard it again. Help. Me. The sheet fell, and there was nothing underneath. I ran. When I got back to the living room, Lindsay was gone. The front door was open, the wind howling through it. I called her name, stepping outside. The yard was empty, the fire pit dead. My breath clouded in front of me as I turned in circles, scanning the fields. Then I saw her, standing near the edge of the woods, barefoot, her white jacket glowing in the moonlight. Lindsay, I shouted, running toward her. She didn't move. When I got closer, I realized something was wrong. Her head was tilted, her body stiff. Her eyes were wide, staring past me. And behind her, something stood in the trees. It was the woman again, the one from the attic. Only this time I could see her fully. Her skin hung in tatters, her hands dark with soil. She was smiling, her lips cracking apart, and when she opened her mouth, I saw black water pour out. I grabbed Lindsay's arm, but she didn't react. Her skin was cold as ice. I dragged her backward, shouting for help, but the house was silent. The woman started walking toward us. Every step made the air colder. The ground seemed to pulse beneath her feet. When I finally looked back at Lindsay, she was gone, just gone. No sound, no trace, nothing. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the house, only that when I did, the door slammed shut behind me. I could hear something moving upstairs, footsteps running back and forth, and a woman laughing softly. I grabbed my phone, but it was dead. Then from the kitchen, I heard it again. Mark. I turned. The same face. Inches away. She lunged, and then nothing. When I woke up, it was morning. The house was empty. Jake and the others were gone. Lindsay's car was still outside, but the driver's door was open. Her keys were sitting on the seat. I called the police. They searched for days, found nothing. No signs of struggle, no tracks in the fields, no trace of her. Jake said he didn't remember anything after midnight. The others said they left around 2. No one believed what I told them about the woman. They said I was drunk or dreaming. A few months later, the Miller house burned down. No one knows how. Jake moved away, and the land's been empty ever since. But sometimes, late at night, when I drive past those woods, I still see a faint light moving through the trees, like a candle swaying back and forth. And if you roll down the window, you can hear her voice in the wind. Help me. Story the end. It was the kind of Halloween night that felt alive with menace. The air was crisp, almost biting, and the wind pushed through the streets of our small Midwestern town, rattling the bare branches of trees like skeletal fingers. I was 17, a senior in high school, and like most kids in my neighborhood, I was itching for some trouble. Nothing serious, just the usual mix of dares, candy, and that nervous thrill that comes with darkness on Halloween. But that year, Halloween had a different plan for me. I had been invited to a party at the edge of town, a place most of us called the old Carter farm. No one had lived there for decades, not since Old Man Carter died under strange circumstances that the older kids whispered about but never explained. The house itself was a hulking, decaying structure, peeling paint, broken windows, the kind of place that seemed to lean toward the woods as if it were trying to escape its own land. Every Halloween, some kids dared each other to go inside, but no one stayed long. That year, the invitation came from Derek, a kid a year older than me, notorious for taking things too far. He said he'd found a way to make the night unforgettable. We gathered at the usual spot before heading out, the park near the middle school. 4 of us went together, me, my best friend Liz, her younger brother Tommy, and Derek. Everyone else at school seemed to know about the party except for me. It felt like a trap, but I didn't care. I wanted to prove I wasn't scared. The air smelled faintly of burnt leaves, a smell that seemed to permeate everything. Liz kept checking her phone, murmuring about how sketchy this all was, but Derek laughed, flashing that cocky grin, insisting it would be legendary. The walk to the Carter farm took about 40 minutes, mostly along empty streets and then the trail leading into the woods. Our flashlights cut thin circles of light through the shadows. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. The woods had that hollow, echoing quality, like something was listening. Tommy, being 10, clutched Liz's hand tightly, shivering. I tried to mask my own unease, telling jokes, making the group laugh, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. When we finally crested the hill, the Carter house came into view. It was worse than I expected. A low mist curled around the foundation and the windows glowed faintly orange, though I could see no fire. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, swaying slightly despite the lack of wind. Derek pushed it open, the metal hinges screeching like a scream, and we stepped inside. The inside was worse than the outside. Dark, cold, and smelled like rot. A thick layer of dust covered everything, but there were signs that someone had been there recently. A pile of old newspapers, some smashed furniture, and footprints in the dust that didn't belong to any of us. Derek shined his flashlight around, making jokes about ghosts and haunted houses, but his voice trembled. I noticed it, but he didn't see me notice. Liz's grip on Tommy tightened. We moved through the first floor, the wooden floorboards groaning under our weight. Derek led us to what had once been the living room, now a wreck of broken chairs and a fireplace blackened with soot. That's when we saw it, a small figure in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was a mannequin or some kind of prop, but as we approached, I realized it was a child, pale, hunched over, and still as stone. It didn't move, didn't breathe, or at least I couldn't see it breathe. Its dark hair hung in its eyes, hiding its face. Tommy whimpered. Is that real?" he asked, voice barely audible. "Probably just some dumb kid messing with us," Derek said, though I caught the edge of panic in his tone. The figure didn't respond. Then it raised its head slowly. The eyes. God, the eyes. They were black, like voids, and they locked onto us in a way that felt wrong. Not human wrong. Something deeper. Liz screamed. Derek cursed and tried to laugh it off, but I could tell he wanted to run. The thing in the corner tilted its head unnaturally, like it was studying us, calculating. Then it moved. Just a step, but the sound it made, like fingernails dragging across wood. My stomach flipped. "Run," I said. We did. Out the door and into the yard, but the house seemed to stretch, the doorway farther than it should have been. Derek tripped on the broken steps, and I had to grab him. We stumbled into the yard, the mist thickening, and that's when I realized the figure wasn't behind us anymore. We hadn't seen it follow, but it was there. A shadow slipping between the trees, moving faster than a child could. Tommy started crying, and Liz dragged him forward. I turned my flashlight toward it, but it vanished. The mist seemed to swallow everything, and the night felt impossibly deep, heavy. We ran into the woods, not sure where we were going, only knowing we had to get away. The sounds followed us, the scratching, the whispers, and sometimes laughter. Not Derek's laughter, not mine. Something else. We didn't stop until we broke through the tree line and stumbled onto the main road. Cars passed, ordinary people in ordinary lives, oblivious to the horror that had been chasing us. We didn't speak until we reached my house, breathless and soaked in sweat. My parents were asleep, and I couldn't bring myself to tell them what happened. Derek swore he hadn't seen anything, but Liz, Tommy, and we all knew. We all felt it. That night, I had nightmares that I still can't shake. Even years later, shadows moving just out of sight, whispers calling my name, eyes in the dark, always watching. When morning came, the Carter house looked ordinary from the road, just a dilapidated farm, nothing strange about it. But we knew better. The weeks after were tense. Derek stopped inviting me to hang out, and I think he was scared too. Tommy wouldn't go near the woods again. Liz's parents forbade her from being out after dark for months. But the thing is, the house didn't disappear. The mist would roll in every night, thicker than it should be. Some kids swore they saw the figure in their peripheral vision just inside the tree line, but it was gone when they looked directly. Then, a month later, things escalated. We were walking back from school, taking the shortcut along the wooded trail, and the air turned cold. Too cold for September. The mist rose, unnaturally dense. And then we heard it, scratching, dragging, breathing. Not human, not animal, something large, something patient. It moved in the shadows, and I swear it was laughing. It circled us, slow and deliberate. We ran, of course, but the whispers followed. That night I checked every window in my house, every lock, every corner, and when I thought I was safe, I saw it. Just outside my window, eyes blacker than night, staring. Then gone. No footprints, no sign it had ever been there, but I felt it, always there. Halloween came again the next year. I thought maybe the experience had been a one-time thing, a mix of fear and adolescent imagination. But then Derek didn't show up at school. No one had seen him since late October. Rumors spread that he had run away, but some of us knew better. On Halloween night, I was home alone. The streetlights flickered. The mist rolled in from the edge of town, curling down the empty sidewalks. I thought about the Carter house, about that first encounter, and I realized the figure had never left. That night, I swore I heard footsteps on my porch. I called my parents, but no one answered. I grabbed a kitchen knife, terrified, and moved to the door. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I swung it toward the porch. There was nothing, just darkness and mist. I told myself it was the wind. But then a shadow moved in the corner of my vision. Black, wrong, unnatural. I froze. The whisper came, a voice that was part Derek, part something else. Come back. I ran to my car, started it, and drove. The mist followed the roads, curling around my headlights, pressing in from all sides. I didn't stop until I reached my friend's house across town. We stayed there, listening to the wind, the trees, the world outside that didn't feel like our own. Derek never returned to school. Some of the older kids whispered that he had gone into the Carter house that night and didn't come back. No one ever entered that house again, at least not willingly. Years have passed, but the memory doesn't fade. I moved away from that town after high school, but sometimes when I drive at night through fog or down empty roads, I feel the same presence. Watching. Waiting. And I know, deep down, it's still there. The thing from that Halloween night is patient. It doesn't need to rush. It knows I'll remember, and maybe that's enough for it. I never found out what exactly we saw that night, but it wasn't human. It wasn't alive in any way I could comprehend, and I know I'm not the only one who's seen it. Some of the kids who dared go near the Carter house after us, well, they don't talk much. Some of them disappeared. Some moved away, haunted, broken. I've told pieces of this story to people over the years, hoping it was just my imagination, but the fear in their eyes told me otherwise. People have seen it. People have felt it, and it waits for Halloween. Every year, patient, watching, hungry for curiosity and courage. Even now, on foggy October nights, I can't help looking over my shoulder. Even now, I can feel those black eyes just outside the corner of my vision, and the faintest whisper of a voice I once knew saying, "Come back." Story, the end. It was the kind of Halloween night that people talked about years later, the kind where the air felt heavier than usual and shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. I had moved to a small town in Pennsylvania over the summer, a town that seemed picturesque at first glance. Tree-lined streets, kids running around in costumes, carved pumpkins flickering on every porch. But the locals always hinted at its darker side if you paid attention. I didn't really believe them at first. Ghost stories and Halloween scares were just part of the seasonal charm, right? I was young, 24, new to the area, and eager to embrace the American Halloween traditions that I had mostly only seen in movies. I had rented a small old house on the outskirts of town. The place was a two-story Victorian fixer-upper, creaking in all the right places, with paint peeling off the shutters and a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. The owner, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Carver, warned me as I signed the lease, "Halloween's different here. People vanish. Kids hear things. Strange things happen. Don't wander at night." She said it almost jokingly, but her eyes had a seriousness to them that made me pause. I laughed it off. I grew up in a rural town with its fair share of local legends. It wasn't going to scare me. By the first week of October, I was settled in. The house had electricity, though the wiring flickered sometimes, and a few floorboards groaned like they were complaining about being stepped on. I spent most evenings unpacking, reading, or checking out the town. The main street was charming, lined with mom-and-pop shops, a diner, and a small grocery store. Everyone was friendly enough, but I noticed something subtle. When Halloween approached, the locals seemed to retreat slightly. There were whispers about things in the woods and the Hollow, an area I hadn't yet explored. Halloween night arrived. I had invited a couple of coworkers over, Josh, a tall guy with a sarcastic streak, and Marcy, who loved Halloween so much she practically lived in costume shops. They arrived around 6, carrying decorations and snacks, ready to turn my old Victorian house into a mini haunted mansion. We strung fake cobwebs, set up fake tombstones in the front yard, and placed a few carved pumpkins with LED lights inside. Everything felt festive. By 8, the neighborhood kids started trick-or-treating. I opened the door a few times, handing out candy, and watched the parade of costumes. Witches, superheroes, animals, zombies. Around 9, Josh suggested we explore a little beyond the main streets. "You're new here," he said, grinning. "We'll take you to the Hollow. It's kind of a local tradition." Marcy looked a bit hesitant, but intrigued. I nodded, thinking it would be a fun adventure, a little thrill to spice up the night. The Hollow was just beyond the town's edge, past a thin line of woods. A dirt road led into it, narrow and winding, flanked by trees whose branches intertwined above, forming a tunnel of shadows. As we walked in, the streetlights from the town disappeared, and the only illumination came from the moon, half hidden by clouds. The air changed almost immediately. It was colder, heavier, and the usual sounds of the night, crickets, rustling leaves, felt muted as if the Hollow swallowed them. "See that house up there?" Josh whispered, pointing. It was barely visible in the moonlight. A dilapidated structure with broken windows and an overgrown yard. "Nobody lives there anymore," he said. "They say Old Man Whitaker died here decades ago. Some people hear him at night, walking around, calling for, I don't know, someone." Marcy shivered. "You're scaring her," Josh said, nudging me. I laughed, trying to hide my own unease. We moved closer, joking, taking pictures with our phones. When we reached the porch, the floorboards creaked under our weight. One of the windows had a jagged hole, and I swore I saw movement inside, though when I blinked, there was nothing. "Probably just an animal," Josh said. Marcy frowned. "Or a ghost," she muttered, half joking. We didn't stay long. The air was too still, just the shadows too heavy. As we walked back down the dirt road, I thought I heard someone, or something, walking behind us. At first, I assumed it was Josh, who was goofing around, but when I glanced back, the space behind us was empty. I laughed nervously and quickened my pace. The deeper we got into the Hollow, the more I noticed odd things. Trees that looked like they had been carved with faces, branches that seemed to brush against my shoulders, though the air was still, and faint whispering like voices carried on the wind, just on the edge of hearing. We finally made it back to the edge of town. My heart was pounding, not from running, but from the sense that something had been following us. Josh laughed it off. Marcy tried to convince herself it was the wind, and I said nothing, quietly glad to be back in the light. By midnight, we were back in the house, doors locked, lights on, drinking cider. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 1 a.m, I decided to go to bed. Josh and Marcy crashed on the couch, and I settled into the guest bedroom, exhausted. I didn't fall asleep immediately. The wind had picked up, rattling the old windows. Then I heard it. Faint scratching at the back door. I froze, straining to hear. The sound came again, slower this time, deliberate. I told myself it was a branch, maybe an animal, but the sound didn't feel random. It was measured. It went on for a while, and just as I convinced myself it had stopped, a whisper reached my ear. "Get out." I bolted upright, heart hammering. The house was silent, otherwise, the living room dark. I crept out, flashlight in hand, and checked the back door. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. Just the darkness of the yard and the faint rustling of leaves. I locked it again and convinced myself it was my imagination. That was when the knocking started. Slow, deliberate, from upstairs. My bedroom was on the second floor. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. It continued for several minutes, then stopped abruptly. I didn't sleep much after that. Morning brought no answers. Josh and Marcy laughed when I told them chalking it up to Halloween pranks. I wanted to believe them, but something about that house felt wrong, and the hollow felt like it had followed me home. The following week, I noticed strange things. Lights flickering when no one was home, objects slightly moved from where I left them, and faint footsteps at night. I tried to brush it off as old house quirks, but the feeling of being watched persisted. One evening, I was unpacking boxes in the attic when I found an old journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, written by a previous occupant, a young woman who had lived there in the 1940s. The entries were ordinary at first, daily life, chores, the town, but gradually they grew darker. She wrote about seeing figures at the edge of the woods, hearing voices calling her name, and doors opening and closing on their own. The last entry was almost illegible, scratched out in a frenzy. They're in the walls. They watch. Don't let them follow you home. I slammed the journal shut, my hands trembling. The attic felt colder suddenly, and I heard that faint scratching again coming from below. I ran downstairs, grabbed my keys, and drove to my friend's apartment in town, leaving the house empty that night. When I returned the next morning, I found the front door ajar, though I was certain I had locked it. Inside, nothing seemed missing, but the house smelled wrong, metallic, like blood. I couldn't stay, so I called Mrs. Carver. She listened quietly and said, "I warned you. That house, it has a history. People hear things, see things, especially around Halloween. It's old, restless. Restless. Some nights, it claims attention." I didn't fully understand what she meant until the next Halloween. I had moved back to town proper, renting a small apartment, and thought I was done with that house. But that night, while handing out candy, I noticed a figure at the end of the street standing under the dim glow of a street lamp. It was tall, unnaturally still, wearing what looked like tattered clothing from decades ago. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, but I felt its gaze. I blinked, and it was gone. I never returned to that house. Rumors circulated that year. Missing pets, children who claimed someone called their names from the woods, lights flickering in the abandoned Victorian at the edge of town. Locals said the Hollow was hungrier than ever that Halloween. Years later, I still remember that night vividly. The smell, the sounds, the sense of being watched. I know what I saw wasn't my imagination. I've read accounts from others in town who experienced similar things that Halloween. Unexplained shadows, whispers, and figures standing in the distance, disappearing when approached. The Hollow exists, and it has a way of leaving its mark on people, dragging its shadows into their homes, following them long after they leave. I tell people now, casually, when they mention moving or renting old houses in small towns, be careful around Halloween. Some laugh, some don't. But I know what I experienced was real. That night, in the Hollow and in that Victorian house, I felt something ancient, patient, and utterly aware. Something that waits for Halloween to reach out, to watch, and sometimes to follow. I never forgot the whisper that night. Get out. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Story the end. It was the kind of Halloween that felt heavier than usual. The kind where the wind howled through the streets, rattling doors and windows, and where shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. I lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and where Halloween was more than just candy and costumes. It was practically a ritual. That year, I had just turned 22 and had convinced a few friends to come over to my parents' old house, a 2-story Victorian on the edge of town that had been empty for nearly a year. My parents had moved to Florida for work, leaving me to house sit until they returned after Thanksgiving. I loved the isolation of the house, the creaking floors and drafty hallways. It made for the perfect Halloween atmosphere. I invited 4 friends, Jenna, Mike, Sarah, and Alex. We planned to watch horror movies, drink cheap beer, and maybe venture out trick-or-treating for the sake of nostalgia. By 6 p.m., the house smelled of popcorn and old wood, and the wind outside made the old maple trees scrape their skeletal branches against the siding. It was dark early that night, and the orange glow from the jack-o'-lanterns we had carved flickered wildly against the front porch. We started with silly, cheesy horror movies, the kind that made you laugh and then flinch at the jump scares. But by 9 o'clock, the mood in the house had changed. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, more defined. Even the hum of the refrigerator sounded ominous. Sarah, who had a tendency to get nervous easily, kept glancing over her shoulder and whispering that she felt like someone was watching us. We all laughed it off, but there was an edge to the laughter, a tension that didn't dissipate. Around 10, we decided to take a break from movies and explore the house. My parents had left a lot behind when they moved: old furniture, boxes of things that were never unpacked, and some of my old toys from when I was a kid. The attic was filled with dusty trunks and stacks of old clothes. Jenna dared us to go up there, saying it was perfectly haunted and that we could do a little ghost hunt. We grabbed flashlights and crept up the narrow staircase. The attic smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic, like old coins or rust. It was cramped, and the wooden beams groaned under our weight. As we moved deeper in, we noticed a small antique mirror leaning against the wall, covered in dust. Mike joked that it was the haunted mirror and dared Sarah to look into it. She hesitated and then slowly brushed the dust off. "Wow," she whispered. "It's really old and creepy. I think I see someone behind me." We all laughed, turning around. Nothing. Just the piles of boxes and cobwebs. "Scared already?" I teased. Sarah shook her head, but her voice trembled. I don't know. It felt like someone's shadow was moving in the corner." Alex rolled his eyes. "It's the shadows from our flashlights. Classic." We spent another 15 minutes looking around before descending back into the main floor. That's when things started to get weird. The lights flickered once, then twice, then went out completely. We were plunged into darkness, our flashlights the only source of illumination. Jenna started laughing nervously, saying it was perfect timing for the horror vibe. Then we heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping coming from the kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. We froze. It sounded like someone or something was lightly hitting the counters. Mike whispered, "Probably just the wind. This old house, it moves." But the tapping continued, deliberate, rhythmic, moving closer. We strained to hear tap, 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 and then a soft scraping noise like nails on wood. My heart started to pound. I shined my flashlight toward the kitchen. Nothing, just the empty counters and the open pantry. "Okay, that's weird," Sarah muttered, gripping my arm. "I don't like this." I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it's a raccoon or something. Jenna, however, was peering down the hallway toward the back door. "Guys, someone's out there," she whispered. I turned, shining the flashlight through the small window by the door. At first, I saw nothing. Then, in the corner of the glass, a figure moved. Tall, thin, almost featureless in the darkness. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. Alex scoffed. "It's probably just a trick of the light." But I didn't feel like it was a trick. My gut twisted, telling me something was wrong. We locked the doors and drew the curtains. I called my parents just to say hi and make sure everything seemed normal. They were thousands of miles away and couldn't help, but hearing their voices reassured me slightly. Then we heard it again, the tapping, now from upstairs. Not the attic, but the hallway outside our rooms. We all froze. Mike whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Then came a whisper, low, almost inaudible. "Leave." I felt my blood run cold. It didn't sound like any of my friends. It sounded hollow, empty. "Maybe we should leave," Sarah said. Her voice was trembling. "No way," Jenna said, bravely or foolishly. "We can't chicken out on Halloween. This is perfect." Alex muttered something under his breath, clearly not convinced. We decided to stay together in the living room. Lights on, flashlights ready. Every creak of the house made us jump. The wind howled outside, making the windows rattle. Then came the knocking on the front door. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath, debating whether to look through the peephole. Jenna insisted, "It's probably just kids trick-or-treating. Late ones." I inched toward the door, peered through the small window. Nothing. No one. But as I backed away, I saw something in the corner of the yard. A figure, standing completely still, facing the house. Tall, thin, black coat, head tilted slightly to the side. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. "Okay, that's not normal," I whispered. Before anyone could respond, all the lights went out completely and the house went silent, except for the faint sound of breathing. Not ours, something else's. We scrambled to find candles and matches. Jenna lit one, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. That's when we noticed it. Handprints. Smudged, dirty handprints all over the windows, outside, as if someone or something had pressed against the glass, trying to look in. I called 911, voice shaking. The operator told me help was on the way, but we were told to stay put. Meanwhile, the knocking continued, now from the back door, the windows, the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Then a voice, clearer this time, whispering through the walls, "Get out." We were paralyzed with fear. Not a single one of us could move. It was as if the house had a presence of its own, watching us. Then, from the attic, came a sound. Dragging. Slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Jenna's flashlight flickered, revealing the attic door slowly opening on its own. "No, no, no," she said, backing away. Sarah screamed when a shadow shot down the hallway, fast, too fast to be human. It vanished into the living room, leaving behind a cold, damp chill. We huddled together, trying to stay calm. That's when I noticed something chilling, the reflection in the mirror by the hallway. Behind us, a tall, shadowy figure. Not just a shadow, more like darkness made solid with faint glowing eyes. We ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock. The figure followed, moving unnaturally fast, sliding across the floor rather than walking. It reached the door just as we got it open. We bolted into the night, the cold wind slamming against us, branches scratching our faces. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, nearly a mile away. We called 911 again, hysterical, telling them someone was in the house. They sent officers, but when we led them back, the house was empty. No signs of entry, no handprints, no footprints. Nothing. The attic was locked, exactly as it had been when we left. We stayed at a friend's house that night, unable to return. The next day I went back with my parents. Everything was normal. No disturbances, nothing out of place. We chalked it up to nerves, maybe a mix of imagination and old house noises. But I never forgot that night. Every Halloween since, I feel that same cold, watchful presence. And every year I hear stories from others in town. People seeing a figure on that street, by that house, standing silently watching. Some say it only appears on Halloween, others claim it's there year-round. I know what I saw. I felt it, that shadowy figure, the whispers, the taps on the windows. They were real. And to this day, I can't go near that house without feeling the eyes on me, waiting. Even now, years later, when Halloween comes around, I can't sleep. Sometimes I wake to the sound of tapping. Tap, tap, tap! And I know I'm not alone. Story the end. It started on a crisp October evening in a small town in Pennsylvania. The kind of town where every house had at least one jack-o'-lantern flickering on the porch, and where the streets smelled faintly of bonfire smoke and wet leaves. I had moved there only a few months earlier for work. My new apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, directly above a convenience store that never seemed to close. I was looking forward to Halloween. I'd spent a lot of my life in cities, where Halloween was mostly commercial. Kids in overpriced costumes, a few decorations, and lots of candy sales. But this place was different. There was history here. Old houses with stories in the woodwork and the way the street lamps cast shadows across the sidewalks. It felt like Halloween actually belonged. That evening, I had plans to meet some coworkers for a small get-together at someone's house a few blocks away. I had dressed up as a simple ghost, white sheet, cut out holes for eyes, and had a bag of candy in case we ran into any neighborhood kids. The sky was dark, but the streetlights gave everything a golden glow. I walked slowly, enjoying the crunch of leaves underfoot, thinking how peaceful it was. Kids ran past me in skeleton and vampire costumes, their laughter echoing off the buildings. It all seemed normal, perfect even. I reached my coworker's house, a modest Victorian with lights strung around the porch. The party was small but lively, mostly people from the office and a few neighbors. We laughed, drank some cider, and passed around candy. Around 10:30 p.m., someone suggested we go check out the local haunted house down the street, a kind of old warehouse they had turned into a seasonal attraction. I hesitated. I'm not usually a fan of scary attractions, but everyone insisted it was fun. and I didn't want to be the party pooper, so we all piled into 2 cars and drove the few blocks over. The place was what I expected. Cobwebs, fake skeletons, actors in masks jumping out, screams, and the smell of cheap fog machines. But then I noticed something odd. One of the actors, a man dressed in a tattered clown outfit, kept glancing directly at me. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but every time I turned a corner or walked down a new hallway, he appeared again, always silently, standing just out of reach. My friends laughed, thinking I was overreacting. "It's part of the act," someone said, but the intensity of his stare was unnerving. When the attraction finally ended, we all stepped outside into the cool night. I was still thinking about the clown's expression. Something about it had felt off, not just scary, but intentional. I joked about it with my friends, trying to shake it off. Then I noticed a figure standing across the street, half hidden in the shadows. It was him, the clown. Only now he wasn't in costume. His clothes were dirty, torn, and his face, well, the makeup was smeared, but his eyes were impossible to forget. They were dark, sharp, and locked on me. I blinked, and he was gone. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. It had been a long day, I was tired, and my imagination could have easily played tricks on me. We said our goodbyes and I walked back toward my apartment. The streets were quieter now, mostly empty, the occasional car passing by. I kept my jacket pulled tight and my hands in my pockets, trying not to look over my shoulder, trying not to feel the small prickling sensation crawling up my spine. As I approached my building, I noticed the front door was slightly ajar. I live alone and I'm careful about locking doors. My heart rate spiked. I pushed the door open slowly, calling out a half laugh. "Hello? Anyone here?" Silence. I chalked it up to my forgetfulness. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly. But then I noticed something else. My apartment door, the one to my unit, was wide open. I don't leave it open. Ever. I froze. The hall was dark except for the faint light coming from the street lamps through the front window. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. I debated calling the police, but thought maybe someone had just opened it by accident. I grabbed a nearby flashlight from the coat closet, flicked it on, and slowly stepped inside. The apartment smelled different, metallic, like rust or blood. I immediately regretted not calling the cops. Everything seemed in place at first glance. The living room furniture was undisturbed. My computer was exactly where I left it. But then I saw the small things. The kitchen cabinet doors were slightly ajar, the bathroom towels were on the floor, my bedroom door was cracked. I whispered to myself, "No, no, no, no," and edged toward the bedroom. That's when I saw the first mark, a smudge on my mirror. It wasn't dust. It was dark, sticky, smeared in a way that resembled a handprint, though distorted. My chest tightened. I stepped back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Then I heard it, a soft, dragging sound from the bedroom. I couldn't tell if it was something being moved or someone walking. My logical mind tried to explain it. Maybe a raccoon got in, maybe a neighbor somehow wandered in, anything. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I called 911, whispering quickly to the dispatcher, explaining that someone had broken in. The operator asked if I was inside the apartment. I said yes, and she told me to leave immediately if I could, or lock myself in a room. I didn't have time to think. Something slammed against my bedroom door. Hard. Then again, and again. I froze. I realized that it wasn't just a person, it was deliberate, angry, like someone wanted me to know they were there, like they were enjoying my fear. I grabbed my phone, trying to stay quiet, and crawled toward the living room window. I almost tripped over my couch. I looked back toward the bedroom, and in the dim flashlight glow, I saw him, standing in the middle of my bedroom, just staring. His face was twisted now, like a nightmare version of a human smile, but his eyes, those eyes were the same, burning and alive. I screamed into the phone, "He's in my apartment! He's..." The line went dead. The flashlight flickered and then went out. Pitch black. I could hear him moving closer, slow, deliberate steps. I could feel the floorboards creak under his weight. My breath caught in my throat. I backed into the corner of the living room, trying to stay as silent as possible, wishing desperately I had a weapon. Then the phone rang. I jumped, dropped it, and it skittered across the floor. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A raspy whisper came through. "I see you." The call ended before I could respond. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I thought maybe if I ran out the front door, I could escape. I moved toward the door, careful to stay low. That's when I felt it, cold, unnatural, like ice brushing my arm. I spun around, expecting to see him right there, but no one was there. I took a deep breath, telling myself I had imagined it. I opened the door and ran into the hall, screaming for help. The building was empty. The front door was still open. I ran down the steps and into the street, not stopping until I reached my neighbor's house. The police arrived quickly. They searched the building, my apartment, everything. No one was found. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. My apartment smelled faintly of something metallic, but that was it. The officers told me that sometimes people break in but are gone before they arrive, that it could have been a prank or maybe a homeless person. But they didn't see the look in my eyes. They didn't feel the terror. That night, I stayed at my neighbor's house. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face. The smeared makeup, the dark eyes, the smile that wasn't a smile. I thought it was over. But then, in the early morning hours, my phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. Next time, I won't leave the door open. I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay. I left everything behind, even things I loved, but the thing that haunts me most isn't the break-in. It's that clown. Wherever I go, I can feel him watching, waiting. Halloween will never feel safe again, and every year on the same night, I can't help but check my phone, hoping there's nothing new, but fearing there will be. Years later, I discovered the building I had lived above used to be a home for circus performers in the early 1900s. There were stories, rumors of a performer who went mad and disappeared, someone obsessed with scaring people, with being seen and yet invisible. I don't know if it was him. I don't know if it was real. All I know is that October 31st now carries a weight I can't shake, a fear that is as real as the ground beneath my feet. I've tried therapy, tried moving to other cities, tried rationalizing it as coincidence, imagination, stress. Nothing works. Sometimes late at night, I wake up and hear the sound of dragging footsteps in my apartment, soft and deliberate. I know I'm not imagining it. I know he's still out there, patient, waiting for the next Halloween to return. And every year I brace myself because I know that when he comes back, it won't be a joke anymore. Story the end. It was October 31st in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where Halloween wasn't just a holiday, it was an obsession. Every street was lined with carved pumpkins, fake cobwebs, and animatronic ghosts that flailed their limbs at passing children. The air had that crisp bite that made people instinctively pull their jackets closer, and there was a certain smell, wet leaves mixed with the faint tang of bonfires from earlier in the day. My friends and I had been planning for months to hit the most notorious house in town, a large Victorian at the end of Cedar Lane. Everyone called it the Holloway House. Rumors had surrounded it for decades. It was abandoned, yes, but locals whispered about strange noises, figures in the windows, and children disappearing from the neighborhood who were later found wandering near the property, often hours later, silent and pale. No one knew why, but it had that aura of danger that drew teenagers in like moths to flame. My friends and I, 3 of us actually, since the others backed out at the last minute, were late teens who thrived on dares. There was me, Tyler, the self-proclaimed fearless leader, my best friend, Casey, who was more cautious but hated being called a coward, and Jenna, who had the sharpest instincts of the group but secretly loved the thrill. We decided that night we'd prove ourselves by spending the whole evening in the Holloway House, something no one in town had done since the last family that lived there mysteriously vanished 40 years ago. By 6:30 p.m., we were dressed in black hoodies and jeans, carrying flashlights and avoiding the main roads to ensure no adults saw us sneaking onto the property. The Holloway House was as eerie in person as it was in the stories. Its paint had peeled away, the windows were darkened with grime, and the front yard had weeds so tall they brushed against our knees. An old iron gate hanging crookedly on one hinge creaked as we pushed it open. The crunch of dead leaves beneath our shoes seemed deafening in the quiet evening. We made our way to the front door, which was slightly ajar. Casey hesitated. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't." "Don't be a baby," I interrupted. "This is it. Tonight's the night we finally see what's inside." Jenna rolled her eyes but didn't argue. We pushed the door further open and stepped into the foyer. It smelled like damp wood and something metallic, like blood, though it was faint. Dust motes floated in the beam of our flashlights. The house was bigger than it looked from the outside. There was a grand staircase, though the railing was cracked and splintered. Old portraits hung crooked on the walls. The eyes in the painting seemed unnervingly lifelike, though we tried not to dwell on it. We explored cautiously, room by room. Most were empty, except for furniture draped in yellowing sheets. Sometimes we'd hear creaks from upstairs, but none of us had the nerve to go up yet. In the dining room, we found a table set as if for a family dinner, plates with dust-covered crumbs, silverware tarnished black, and a decaying loaf of bread. Casey gagged. "This is disgusting," he whispered. "Perfect," I said. "It's exactly how a haunted house should be." As the night progressed, our bravado slowly faded. We heard things that didn't make sense, footsteps above us, whispers too soft to catch words, and a faint scratching noise from the walls. At one point, I swore I saw a shadow dart across the hallway. Casey and Jenna both saw it too, and suddenly our joking ended. We decided to brave the basement. The steps groaned under our weight as we descended into a darkness that seemed almost tangible. The air was colder down there, heavy with moisture and the scent of rot. Our flashlights illuminated piles of broken furniture and old boxes, and then something else. A figure. At first we thought it was a mannequin or a statue. It was standing in the corner, pale and thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. But then it moved, slowly. Its limbs jerked in a way that made it seem unnatural, like it was learning to move as it went. Casey gasped and tripped over a box. The figure turned toward us. Its face was obscured by shadow, but we could see the faint glint of eyes reflecting the flashlight. We ran. Up the stairs, through the hallway, and out the front door. The iron gate slammed shut behind us as if pushed by a strong wind. None of us spoke for several minutes, still catching our breath. Did you see that?" Jenna finally whispered. "I don't even want to talk about it," Casey said, pale. I tried to brush it off, but deep down I knew something in that house wasn't human. We decided to leave, but as we walked back toward town, something felt wrong. The streets were empty, far too empty for Halloween night. Even from a distance, the Holloway house looked alive, as if it were watching us. The next day, curiosity got the better of us. We returned to the town library to dig into the house's history. We found news articles dating back decades. Stories of the Holloway family, a father, mother, and 2 children. Then one day, the whole family vanished without explanation. There were rumors of ritualistic practices, of mental illness, of neighbors hearing screams late at night. But nothing concrete. We also discovered that in 1982, a teenage boy had attempted to spend the night in the house. His body was found outside the next morning, eyes wide with terror, mouth open as if screaming. No cause of death was ever determined. That was the first warning sign, but we weren't listening yet. The next Halloween came, and though none of us planned to return, the curiosity gnawed at me. 1 year later, Casey vanished. No note, no sign of struggle, just gone. The police searched for weeks, and the only clue was a single set of footprints leading towards Cedar Lane, stopping abruptly at the Holloway house. Jenna refused to go back, and I was too scared to go alone. But a few years later, I ended up in the area again, living near the town as an adult. Halloween night rolled around, and the Holloway house still stood. Nothing had changed. And yet I felt drawn to it, a compulsion I couldn't explain. I remember walking down Cedar Lane, heart pounding, flashlight in hand. The gate was closed, but as I approached, it swung open slowly, almost inviting me. The house looked different somehow. The air was heavier, and I could hear whispers, soft, urgent, calling my name. I stepped inside. The interior had changed. The house was alive now. The shadows moved as if they had weight, and the walls seemed to breathe. I could hear footsteps, countless footsteps coming from upstairs. Then I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, pale, thin, watching me. They moved toward me, and I realized they weren't just ghosts. They were hungry, desperate, and angry. I ran, tripping over furniture, knocking over objects. I didn't look back, but I could feel them behind me, a constant pressure, like invisible hands brushing against my back. I burst through the front door and into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The gate slammed shut behind me again. I never went back. The Holloway House still stands today, abandoned to the world, but not to whatever lives inside. People still dare each other to go near it on Halloween. Some say the figures in the windows are only shadows. Others claim they've heard screams coming from the house, even in the middle of the day. Every Halloween, I see lights flicker in the upper windows when no one is inside. I hear whispers when I'm alone, and sometimes when the wind blows just right, I think I hear the soft creak of the iron gate opening, inviting me back in. I warn anyone who dares to listen, the Holloway House isn't just a house, it's alive, and it's waiting, and it's patient. Story the end. It was Halloween weekend in 2021, and I had just moved into a small apartment in rural Pennsylvania. The town of Harrowsville was quiet most of the year, but come October, it felt like the entire place transformed. Pumpkins lined the porches, fake cobwebs hung from the streetlights, and kids ran around in costumes that were far too scary for their age. For me, it was my first Halloween away from my family, and I wasn't sure how to spend it. I had a new job at a convenience store on the edge of town. It was the kind of place that stayed open late, and most of the clientele were night shift workers, drunk drivers, or teenagers looking for trouble. That Friday, my manager told me I'd be closing alone. "Don't worry," she said. "It's just one night. The traffic will be low because of Halloween parties. But just keep your phone charged." I laughed it off, thinking she was exaggerating. But as I drove to the store that evening, the sky was dark and thick with clouds. A cold wind blew through the skeletal trees lining the main road. Something about the way the shadows moved across the empty streets put me on edge. The store was quiet when I arrived. I flipped the open sign and started restocking shelves while listening to the radio. The faint sounds of Halloween music mixed with the occasional thunder in the distance. Around 9, the first few customers trickled in, mostly teenagers with bags of candy and soda, laughing nervously. Everything seemed normal until about 10:30. I was in the back, organizing the candy display, when I heard a soft tapping at the front door. I looked up. Nobody was there. Just the dark reflection of the parking lot through the glass. I shook my head. Must be a branch hitting the window. The tapping came again, louder this time. I approached the door cautiously and pulled it open. The lot was empty. No cars, no people, nothing. The air was colder than it had been moments before, and I could see my breath forming in the dim light. I went back inside, trying to tell myself it was nothing, but the feeling didn't leave. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned the corner to check the aisles, and that's when I saw it, a small figure standing near the candy display. It was a kid, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a tattered clown costume. But the thing that froze me wasn't the costume, it was the face. Pale, almost gray, with dark circles around its eyes and a wide, unnatural grin. "Hi," it whispered. I stumbled back. "Hey, where are your parents?" The figure tilted its head, and the grin widened impossibly. "No parents," it said, voice high and cracked like it hadn't been used in years. "Just me." Before I could react, the lights in the store flickered. When they came back on, the figure was gone. My heart was racing. I ran to the front, scanning the lot. Empty, not a single car or person. I told myself it was just a prank, some kid trying to scare me. But then I heard it again, the soft, broken whisper coming from the aisles behind me. "Play with me." I froze. My eyes darted down the rows, but nothing moved. The sound seemed to echo from everywhere at once. I grabbed my phone and dialed my manager, ready to tell her I needed backup. The line was dead. Every line in the store was dead. My stomach sank, then the lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the store. I could hear my own breathing, my heart pounding, and then scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching from the ceiling, like claws dragging across metal. I ran to the back door, pulling it open, and stumbled into the parking lot. Rain had started, cold and relentless, soaking me instantly, but the lot was still empty. I ran to my car, fumbled with the keys, and as soon as the engine started, I saw it, standing at the edge of the lot, that same small figure. The grin stretched impossibly wide, its head tilted to one side. I didn't wait. I drove straight through the dark roads, rain blinding my view. My phone finally got a signal, and I called the police. They said they'd check it out, but by the time they arrived at the store, nothing was there. Just the faint smell of wet earth and something burned like hair or fabric. I quit that job the next day. I never went back to that town. But the strangest part? That night, when I finally got home and collapsed into bed, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thanks for playing." I never replied. For years afterward, every Halloween, I'd get a new text from the same number. Different message every year. Always short, always wrong. Sometimes just a single word. "See you. Again. Alone." One Halloween, I was living in Chicago. My apartment was on the 12th floor. I got the text at exactly 11:11 p.m. I looked out the window, and for a split second, I thought I saw that pale, grinning face reflected in the glass. I never looked again. To this day, I don't know if it was a ghost, some spirit trapped to haunt the living, or just a hallucination born from stress and isolation. But I know one thing. I don't celebrate Halloween anymore. I don't go near stores after dark. And every October, when the wind starts to pick up and the leaves rustle, I hear that soft whisper, just barely audible under the howl of the wind. "Play with me." Story the end. It was Halloween night in a sleepy town in Pennsylvania, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone else, and the streets were lined with houses carved from red brick, their lawns dotted with pumpkins and fake tombstones. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of cold that bites at your cheeks and seeps into your bones, and the sky hung heavy with low clouds. People had been talking about how weird this year felt. Strangers walking too slowly on empty streets, animals acting restless, the fog creeping in early in the evenings. Leah, 23, had just moved back to her parents' house after a year in Boston. She was working part-time at the local library and spending most of her nights alone in the small bedroom she'd had as a child. That Halloween, her best friend, Mark, convinced her to go to the annual town Halloween party at the old abandoned church on the edge of town. "It's tradition," he said. "Everyone goes, and they say the haunted graveyard is actually haunted this year." The church was nothing more than a skeleton now. Broken windows, rotting doors, and the faint smell of mildew that always lingered in old wood. They arrived around 9 p.m. when the streetlights were dim and fog had started rolling in from the river valley. The air was thick, making their breaths fog up instantly, and everything sounded muffled, even the occasional laughter from people inside the church. Leah didn't like the atmosphere. Something about the fog, the silence between the partygoers, and the way shadows seemed to stretch and move unnaturally made her uneasy. But Mark was already dragging her inside, waving at their friends, trying to brush off her concern. Inside, the church had been transformed into a Halloween maze. Candles lined the walls, cobwebs hung from the rafters, and eerie sound effects made the floors creak like the building itself was alive. People laughed, drank cider, and wandered from room to room. Leah followed Mark, trying to calm the tight feeling in her chest. The first sign that something was wrong came from the basement. They were walking near the back of the church when Leah noticed the door to the basement slightly ajar. A thin, almost imperceptible light flickered from inside. She paused, and Mark glanced back. "Go on, it's just part of the maze," he said. But Leah had a bad feeling. She leaned closer to the doorway. The light was faint, amber-colored like a candle, but she could see movement. Small shadows crawling along the floor. She blinked, and they disappeared. "Leah, come on," Mark said impatiently. She shook her head, and before she could pull away, a voice whispered her name. "Leah." It was soft, distant, yet unmistakable. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Mark, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked. "Someone." She stopped. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Leah, down here." The words were slow, deliberate, and wrong. There was something in the voice, a rasp, a tone that didn't belong to any living person. Mark laughed nervously. "It's probably part of the haunted setup. You're letting your imagination get to you." But Leah wasn't so sure. Her instincts screamed at her. She wanted to leave, but curiosity or fear kept her rooted. She looked into the basement. The flickering light came from a lantern on the floor. Around it, the shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense, like twisted shapes of people kneeling and bowing. She took a step back. Then she felt it, a cold hand brushing her arm, gentle but firm. She spun around. No one was there. "Leah!" Mark grabbed her shoulder. "You're scaring me now. Let's just..." The lights flickered violently, then went out. Total darkness. Screams erupted from the other rooms. People were running, half bumping into each other, shouting names. Leah felt Mark's hand slip from hers as he disappeared into the chaos. Then came footsteps, slow, dragging across the wooden floor above. Heavy, deliberate, echoing. Leah froze, pressing herself against the wall. The footsteps stopped directly over her head. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, circling her like a predator. Leah, come, down here. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. The voice was calling her from somewhere deep inside the basement. Against her better judgment, she crawled toward the stairs, gripping the railing. The air was so cold it burned her hands. As she reached the first step, a figure emerged from the shadows below. A tall man, covered in rags, face pale and expressionless, eyes black voids. It moved unnaturally, jerking in sudden, unnatural motions. Leah stumbled backward, falling down the last few steps, her lantern clattering across the floor. The figure stopped at the bottom, tilting its head, staring. The whispers filled the basement, now multiple voices, speaking all at once, repeating her name, mocking her. Leah? Leah? She scrambled toward the far corner of the basement. There, she saw another person, an older woman she didn't recognize, frozen in the corner, eyes wide in terror, not moving. The figure at the bottom of the stairs advanced slowly, step by step, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. Then the power came back on. Lights flickered across the basement, revealing nothing. The tall figure, the shadows, the old woman, they were gone. Only Leah remained, trembling, her knees pressed into the damp floor. She stumbled up the stairs and found herself in an empty church. The party had vanished. Chairs were overturned, decorations shredded, and the doors leading outside hung open to the foggy night. No one was around. She ran to her car, heart hammering, fumbling with the keys. The streets were empty. No signs of the partygoers, no cars, no footprints in the fog. Just her headlights cutting through the gray haze. The next day, the town was in chaos. People reported dozens missing. The police found no trace of anyone who had attended the party. Only abandoned cars, empty streets, and scattered Halloween decorations. Leah moved away from the town soon after, trying to forget what happened. But at night, when the wind howls and fog creeps over the streets, she swears she hears whispers in her own home. Her name repeated over and over, slow, raspy, impossible to ignore. And sometimes in the corner of her vision, she sees a tall figure standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. Story, the end. It was the week before Halloween in a small town in Pennsylvania called Oak Ridge. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's business, where the streets are lined with old maple trees and the air carries the sharp smell of damp leaves and wood smoke. I had just turned 24 and moved back in with my parents after losing my job in the city. I wasn't exactly excited about going out that week, but my friend Tony insisted we check out this legendary haunted house on the edge of town. The house wasn't on any main road. You had to take a narrow dirt lane overgrown with weeds that twisted through the woods. According to town gossip, the house had been abandoned since the late 70s. Its previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Finch, had vanished one Halloween night without a trace. People said the house was cursed, that anyone who went inside might never come out, or if they did, they'd be changed. Tony and I decided to go anyway. I remember that night being bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every movement feel heavy. I drove his old pickup truck, headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. As we got closer, the house emerged from the shadows like a creature. It was massive, 3 stories with boarded-up windows, rotting siding, and a porch that sagged like it might collapse under its own weight. We parked on the overgrown lawn, the truck crunching through dead leaves. Tony jumped out, flashlight in hand, practically bouncing with excitement. "Come on, man. This is going to be amazing. You're not chicken, are you?" I laughed nervously. "I'm not scared. I just hope the floor doesn't collapse or something." Tony rolled his eyes. "Relax. We'll be fine." We climbed onto the porch. The boards creaked ominously under our weight. The front door was barely hanging on its hinges. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me immediately. Dust, rot, and something metallic underneath, like old blood. My stomach twisted. The inside was worse than I imagined. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, cobwebs draped the corners like curtains, and furniture lay broken and overturned. A grand chandelier hung at a crooked angle from the ceiling. Every step we took echoed, and it felt like the house itself was breathing. Tony led the way, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Legend says Finch was obsessed with, I don't know, experiments. People claim he tried to bring someone back from the dead. I forced a laugh. You mean like Frankenstein? Really? He shrugged. That's what people say. And the weird thing, every Halloween, locals claim to see lights flickering in the windows, even though no one has lived here for decades. We reached the staircase. It groaned under our weight. I paused at the bottom, noticing something on the wall. There were strange symbols scratched into the plaster, circles, lines, and markings that didn't make sense. The air felt heavier, oppressive, almost suffocating. I don't like this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Relax, Tony said. We're just exploring. We went upstairs. The floorboards sagged. Dust particles floated in the flashlight beams. Each room we entered was worse than the last. Shattered mirrors, old toys scattered around, and walls marked with more strange scratches. Then we heard it. A soft, wet thumping from the floor above us. What the hell was that? I whispered. Tony froze. I don't know. Maybe a raccoon or something? We continued slowly, and the thumping continued, growing louder. Then a faint whisper. Get out. I stopped dead. Did you hear that? Tony's face went pale. Yeah, probably just the wind. I wanted to believe him, but my instincts screamed otherwise. We reached the top floor, a long hallway with doors on either side. One door at the end was partially open. Light flickered inside. I don't remember consciously deciding to go toward it, but something pulled me, an almost magnetic urge. Tony followed reluctantly. Inside was a nursery. Old toys lay scattered, the walls painted with faded cartoon murals. But what caught my attention was the crib in the corner. It was empty, or so it seemed. The mattress was sunken in the middle, as if something heavy had been lying there recently. Then the door slammed behind us. I spun around, flashlight shaking. Tony cursed under his breath. We ran to the door. It wouldn't budge. Panic set in. From the crib I heard it again, the whisper, more urgent this time. Get out. Leave now. The mattress shifted violently. Something alive rose from it. Pale, thin, limbs like sticks, and eyes wide and black. I swear I saw it before I even screamed. Tony screamed too. We pounded on the door, finally breaking it open. We ran down the stairs, stumbling over each other, hearts hammering. As we burst out of the front door, I turned to look at the house. The windows flickered with pale blue light, like candles in every room. And for a brief moment, I thought I saw him, Harold Finch, standing in the top window, just watching us, smiling. We didn't stop running until we got back to the truck. My hands shook so badly I could barely start it. Tony turned on the radio to calm down. The DJ was talking about Halloween parties in town, unaware of our terror. As we drove back into town, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. In the distance, near the edge of the woods where the house had been, there was a figure walking slowly along the dirt lane, toward us. Pale skin, sunken eyes, a smile that didn't belong to a living person. I slammed the accelerator. The figure didn't run, didn't disappear. It just kept walking, keeping pace with the truck. When we finally got to my parents' house, we parked in the driveway, doors locked immediately. We both sat in silence for a long time. The next day, we tried to convince ourselves it was a trick of the shadows, an overactive imagination. But later that week, the Oak Ridge Gazette ran an article. Another hiker had reported seeing a pale man standing in the yard of the Finch house at night. When the town council went to inspect, the house was gone. Not burned down, not demolished, gone, as if it had never existed. I haven't gone near those woods since, but every Halloween, I still feel that pull. A magnetic tug toward the edge of town, toward nothing, and sometimes I hear faint whispers in the wind. Get out, come back. Tony won't talk about that night. Neither will I, except to warn anyone stupid enough to think they can explore the Finch house. Some things don't belong to the living anymore. And if you drive past the woods on a late October night, you might just see it. A pale figure standing at the tree line, smiling, waiting for someone foolish enough to wander in. Story the end. It started on a Halloween night in 2017 in a small town in upstate New York. I was 19 and had just started college nearby, staying in a small off-campus apartment with a roommate named Jenna. She was the cautious type, always double-checking locks and watching the news. But I wasn't. I thought Halloween was just candy, costumes, and drunk college kids causing harmless chaos. That night, however, would change how I looked at the holiday forever. The day had been sunny, crisp, and bright. By 7 p.m., the streets were alive with kids in costumes, parents laughing, and decorations glowing from nearly every house. Jenna and I had decided not to hand out candy. Our apartment didn't feel safe for it, but we did want to watch some horror movies. We had the lights off, candles lit around the living room, and a bowl of candy for ourselves, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. Around 8:30, the doorbell rang. At first I thought it was a kid or two, Halloween after all, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Not a single child, not a parent, not a bag of candy left behind. Just the empty porch, dimly lit by our motion sensor light. Probably some prank, Jenna said, rolling her eyes. Kids these days. I shrugged and went back to the couch. A few minutes later, the bell rang again, louder this time. I walked over slowly, my bare feet on the cold floor. Again, nothing. By the third ring, I was starting to get uneasy. The hallway smelled faintly like wet leaves and something metallic like blood or rust. Jenna peeked out the peephole with me. Her face went pale. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I didn't see anything. Maybe a reflection, I said, but even as I lied to her, my gut was twisting. The fourth ring was different. It was rapid, almost frantic, not just a doorbell chime. It was urgent. I opened the door quickly, expecting maybe a kid hiding, but the porch was empty again. That's when I noticed it. A small jack-o'-lantern sitting right at the edge of the step, freshly carved, the candle inside glowing warmly. But the face was wrong. The eyes were too large, the smile stretched unnaturally, and the candlelight seemed to move inside it like something alive. Jenna came up behind me, staring. "We shouldn't touch it." I was already picking it up. The moment my hands touched the pumpkin, a cold shock ran through me. It wasn't just cold, it felt like it was alive, pulsing slightly. The smell hit me then, a foul stench of wet dirt and decay. I dropped it. It rolled across the porch and stopped. Jenna grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Now." We ran to my car. The pumpkin stayed there, glowing faintly, watching us. On the way to her cousin's house a few blocks away, where we intended to stay for the night, the streets felt empty. Not a single person on the sidewalks, even though we passed houses with lights on. Every jack-o'-lantern we passed seemed to move slightly when we weren't looking directly at it. The eyes would glance at us, the mouths stretching a little wider, the flames flickering faster than they should. When we arrived at her cousin's house, we tried to shake it off. We locked the doors, turned all the lights on, and tried to distract ourselves with horror movies. But the night didn't let up. Around midnight, Jenna heard it first, a scratching at the window. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe a branch from the tree outside had scraped against the glass. But the scratching continued, deliberate and slow, moving from window to window. We froze as we heard a soft, almost whispering voice outside, just audible through the glass. "Trick or treat?" Jenna grabbed me, her hands shaking. "It's not kids." We called her cousin, but the line was dead. My cell had no service. The lights flickered. I thought about the pumpkin on my porch back home, and my stomach churned. Suddenly, from the window facing the driveway, a shadow moved. Not outside, but inside the glass. It was small, hunched, and fast. Something small ran across the other side of the window, then stopped. The eyes glowed faintly orange. The scratching escalated to pounding. Then it stopped. Silence. We didn't sleep that night. We took turns watching the windows, hearing footsteps outside, soft whispers in the yard, and the occasional soft thud against the walls. The next morning, we went outside. The street looked normal. Kids leaving with candy bags, neighbors waving, sunlight warming the autumn leaves. Nothing unusual. But when I looked at the lawn, I noticed a series of small footprints leading from the street to the sidewalk in front of our apartment. They were too small for any adult, and the spacing was uneven, like whatever made them was limping slightly. We went back to the apartment later that week. No sign of the pumpkin, no footprints, no smell. But ever since, every Halloween night, I find a jack-o'-lantern somewhere nearby. Sometimes it's in my yard, sometimes at the end of my driveway, sometimes sitting on a stranger's porch. Always freshly carved, always the stretched, screaming face. I've tried ignoring them, but the whispers start when the sun goes down. Soft at first, growing louder as the night deepens. Trick or treat. And every year, I swear I see a small figure, pale and hunched, watching from the shadows. I don't know what it wants, and I don't know why it follows me. But I know one thing. Halloween isn't just a holiday. Not anymore. Story the end. It was the last Friday of October in a quiet part of Ohio called Miller's Creek, a town small enough that everyone gathered at the same diner and everyone knew which houses were rumored to be haunted. For most of the year, the talk about ghosts and strange stories was just local folklore, something to tell tourists. But when Halloween rolled around, those stories came alive again, and every year, one or two kids would dare each other to go near the Crowley property. That house stood about 3 miles outside of town, hidden behind twisted trees and overgrown weeds, its windows boarded up and its walls blackened by mold and age. People said no one had lived there since the Crowley family vanished in 1994. The father, a schoolteacher named Thomas, had gone mad after losing his job and had supposedly taken his wife and daughter into the woods one stormy Halloween night. None of them came back. I was 17 when my friends convinced me to go out there. There were 5 of us, me, my cousin Aaron, and our friends Jenna, Mark, and Kelly. We'd all grown up hearing the same story, that the Crowley house was cursed, and anyone who spent a night there would never be the same again. I didn't believe in ghosts then, but I remember the way the wind felt that night, the way the leaves scraped against the ground like whispers, and the uneasy silence that came whenever we talked about going. We met up at the old gas station outside town. The parking lot was nearly empty, the neon sign flickering faintly above us. Aaron handed out flashlights while Jenna brought a thermos of coffee. Mark had his dad's camera, hoping to film proof of something paranormal. Kelly was quiet, nervous even before we left. "Are we really doing this?" she asked as we climbed into Aaron's car. "Come on," Aaron said. "It's Halloween. We'll check it out, maybe take a few pictures, and be back before midnight. No big deal." I tried to believe him. The drive was silent except for the soft hiss of rain against the windshield. The road wound through the woods, the trees closing in tighter the farther we went. It felt like driving into another world. Finally, Aaron slowed the car. "There," he said, pointing. Through the fog, I saw it, the Crowley house. It was worse than I imagined. The roof sagged inward, and the windows were nothing but black voids. The front door hung crooked, one hinge broken. There was a rusted swing set in the yard, the chains squeaking softly in the wind. Mark whistled. "Creepy enough for you?" We parked by the old mailbox, which was nearly swallowed by vines. The name Crowley was barely visible through the rust. As soon as I stepped out, the air felt heavier. The rain had stopped, but everything dripped, and the smell of wet earth was thick. The first thing I noticed as we approached the porch was a faint sound coming from inside the house, like a low hum. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the closer we got, the more it sounded like someone whispering words we couldn't understand. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered. Aaron shrugged. "Probably just the wind. Let's go." Inside, it was pitch dark. Our flashlights illuminated walls stained with age, floorboards warped from moisture, and a staircase leading up into the blackness. The smell was sharp, like mold and something metallic underneath. We walked through the living room first. A dusty piano sat against one wall, keys yellowed with time. A few children's drawings still clung to the wallpaper, stick figures and scribbles of what looked like a family. "This is messed up," Kelly muttered. Mark turned on his camera. "Perfect. Let's get some footage." He panned slowly across the room, catching our faces in the light. Then he froze. "Wait," he said quietly. "Did you see that?" We turned. In the corner, where the light barely reached, there was something on the wall. Handprints. Small, dark, and smeared across the wallpaper like someone had dragged their fingers through mud. Only it wasn't mud. Aaron leaned closer. "It's paint. It's paint, right?" Jenna shook her head. "Paint doesn't smell like that." The whispering sound grew louder then, echoing faintly from upstairs. It wasn't words we could make out, more like a woman humming, low and sad. Kelly grabbed my arm. "Please, let's go." But Aaron was already halfway up the stairs. "Probably an animal," he said over his shoulder. We followed him because nobody wanted to stay alone downstairs. The steps creaked under our weight, dust falling in tiny clouds with every step. At the top was a long hallway lined with doors. Aaron opened the first one. A bedroom, probably the daughter's. The wallpaper was pink and peeling, a small bed still in the corner, mattress collapsed inward. On the dresser was a cracked mirror, and written in the dust across it were words that hadn't been there long. "Stay." Okay, that's not funny, I said. Mark looked at us. I didn't do that. We backed out of the room slowly. The next door led to what looked like a study. Books were scattered across the floor, pages warped and torn. A journal lay open on the desk, its writing faint and smeared. I picked it up and read the last line I could make out. The voice calls from the woods again. She says she can see them now. My stomach turned. I think this belonged to Mr. Crowley. Aaron was standing near the window, staring out into the darkness. There's something moving out there, he said softly. We all gathered near him. The backyard stretched out into the forest, but it was hard to see much through the fog. Still, I caught a glimpse of something pale near the tree line. It was gone the second I looked straight at it. Then the humming stopped. Silence, followed by the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs behind us. We turned, flashlights trembling in our hands. The staircase was empty, and yet the sound kept coming, closer and closer. Jenna gasped, "Oh my God!" A shadow appeared at the top step, shaped like a person but wrong somehow, too tall, shoulders hunched. My flashlight flickered, and when it came back, the shadow was gone. That was enough for Kelly. She screamed and ran down the hallway, but as soon as she passed the last door, it slammed shut on its own. "Kelly!" I yelled, rushing forward. She was pulling on the knob, crying. "It won't open." Aaron and I tried to help, but then she went silent. We pushed the door open, and she wasn't there. The room was empty, except for a small wooden chair facing the corner. "Where the hell did she go?" Aaron said, his voice breaking. Mark ran back toward the stairs. "We need to get out of here now." As he reached the top step, something moved behind him, a flash of white like a figure darting past. He dropped the camera and it tumbled down, smashing on the floor below. The humming started again, louder this time, closer. I grabbed Jenna's hand and we ran. Aaron was right behind us. We didn't stop until we were outside, sprinting through the wet grass toward the car. Mark followed a few seconds later, pale and shaking. "Where's Kelly?" Jenna cried. She's gone," Mark said. Aaron started the engine. The car roared to life, and we tore down the road, tires sliding on the mud. None of us spoke the whole way home. The next morning, we went to the police. They searched the Crowley property for 2 days, but never found Kelly. They said it looked like no one had been in that house for years. Even the footprints we'd left in the dust were gone. A week later, Mark got the camera repaired. He told us he wanted to look through the footage, maybe find something we missed. When I went over to his house that night, he was sitting in his room, pale as a sheet. "You need to see this," he said. He hit play. The video showed everything, the house, the stairs, the rooms. But right after the shot of the pink bedroom, something flickered across the screen. A figure standing just behind me. It was blurry, but you could make out the shape of a woman. Her face was pale and hollow, eyes dark and sunken. She was watching us the whole time. Mark paused the video. "It gets worse." He fast-forwarded to the end. The camera had fallen, but it was still recording when Kelly disappeared. For a few seconds, all you could see was the floor. Then, faintly, a voice whispered, "She's home now." Mark turned off the TV, his hands shaking. "That's not from us. None of us said that." After that, he stopped answering our calls. 2 weeks later, his mom found him in his room, the video playing on a loop. He wasn't breathing. The coroner said heart failure, but Mark was 17 and healthy. Aaron moved to another state. Jenna wouldn't talk about it again. And me? I still live here. Last night, I woke up to the sound of humming. I thought I was dreaming at first, but it was real, coming from outside my window. I looked out, and in the glow of the streetlight, I saw a girl standing by the curb. Her clothes were soaked, her hair clinging to her face. She looked up at me, and even from that distance, I recognized her. It was Kelly. Her mouth moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. Then she raised her hand, and in her palm, she was holding something small and silver, Mark's camera. Before I could move, lightning flashed, and she was gone. This morning, I found muddy footprints on my porch, small ones, leading right up to my front door. I think about the Crowley house every time it rains. Sometimes I hear the same humming in the distance. And every Halloween, I dream about the woods behind that house, dark, endless, filled with voices calling my name. I haven't gone back there since that night, but I can feel it still calling me, and deep down, I know one day I won't be able to resist. Story the end. It was the last Friday before Halloween in 2019, and the town of Maple Hollow, Ohio was already buzzing with decorations and lights. The streets smelled faintly of wet leaves and burning firewood, and every other house had pumpkins grinning from their porches. For most people, that weekend meant candy, parties, and laughter. For me, it marked the beginning of something that would never leave my mind again. At the time, I was 22, living in a small two-bedroom rental with my roommate, Tyler. We were both out of college, working low-paying jobs, trying to save up enough to get out of town. That Halloween weekend, we had plans to go to a party thrown by a girl named Emily, someone Tyler knew from high school. It was supposed to be a big deal. Costumes, music, a bonfire in the woods behind her parents' old property. I wasn't much for parties anymore, but Tyler was persistent. He'd been talking about it for weeks, saying it was legendary every year. I finally caved after he promised to drive and not get too drunk. That Friday afternoon, I got off work early. The sky had been gloomy all day, a mix of orange and gray clouds, the kind that looks like it's thinking about raining, but never actually does. I stopped at a thrift store to pick up a last-minute costume, ended up with a flannel shirt, a fake axe, and a rubber mask that smelled like old plastic. When I got back home, Tyler already had his costume laid out on the couch, a Grim Reaper cloak and a plastic scythe. He was drinking a beer, blasting music, his excitement obvious. "You ready, man?" he asked, tossing me one. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, sitting down. "What time's this thing start?" 8. "But we're leaving early. Emily said it gets packed." I nodded, glancing out the window. The street was quiet, except for the occasional car passing by. The trees that lined our road were mostly bare, the last few brown leaves clinging like old paper. Tyler's phone buzzed. He looked at it and grinned. "She just sent me the pin. It's way out near Buckridge Road. You know that stretch of forest?" I looked up sharply. Buckridge Road was notorious in our area. 2 people had gone missing there back in the late 90s, and locals always told stories about strange lights in the woods or cars stalling for no reason. It wasn't the kind of place you wanted to be at night. "Yeah, I know it," I said. "That's where the old quarry used to be, right?" He nodded. "That's the one. Apparently, her family still owns a bunch of land out there." Something about it made me uneasy, but I didn't say anything. I figured it was just one of those places that got creepy after dark. We left around 7. The sky had turned pitch black by the time we hit the main road, and the air had that sharp chill of late October. Tyler drove while I tried to follow the directions on my phone. The further we went, the less reception we had. Houses became sparse, and the headlights barely cut through the dark forest on either side. "Man, this is really out there," I muttered. Tyler laughed. "That's the point. No cops, no neighbors, just booze and fire." We finally turned onto a dirt road marked by a faded wooden sign that said, "Private property." I hesitated. "Dude," I said, "you sure this is the right place?" "Positive," he said, showing me the pin on his phone. "Look, this is where everyone's supposed to meet." Sure enough, a few hundred feet down the road, we saw flickering lights through the trees, lanterns and torches maybe, and the faint thump of music. There were cars parked along both sides of the path. We parked near a cluster of vehicles and got out. The smell of smoke and damp earth filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, someone yelled, followed by laughter. "Looks like we found it," Tyler said, grabbing the beer cooler from the back seat. We walked down the trail until we reached a clearing. There were probably 30 or 40 people there, most of them in costume, gathered around a massive bonfire. The light from it danced across everyone's faces, making masks and makeup look almost alive. Emily spotted Tyler right away and came over, dressed as a witch. She hugged him and then smiled at me. "Hey, you made it. Grab a drink. There's cider and beer by the truck." I nodded, forcing a smile. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, but something about the location kept me on edge. The forest surrounded the clearing completely, and beyond the glow of the fire, it was nothing but pitch black. Every time the wind rustled the branches, I found myself looking over my shoulder. After a while, I loosened up a bit. We played drinking games, listened to music, and watched as a few people lit sparklers near the fire. Tyler was flirting with Emily, and I was just glad to not be standing alone. Around 10, someone shouted that they were going to do a Halloween dare, A group of about 6 people started gathering by the fire, holding flashlights. "What kind of dare?" I asked. Emily grinned. "It's a tradition. We go into the woods to find the old Miller cabin." I frowned. "What's that?" She laughed like it was common knowledge. "You don't know the story? Oh my God. Okay. So the Millers used to live out here like 100 years ago. Husband, wife, and 2 little girls. One Halloween night, something happened. No one's sure what. But by morning, the cabin was burned down and the whole family was gone. Some say the father killed them. Others say it was a ritual thing. The ruins are still back there somewhere." Tyler's eyes lit up. "We're doing that," he said immediately. I hesitated. "You sure that's a good idea?" "It's pitch black, man." "Come on, don't be a buzzkill," he said. "We'll take flashlights." I wanted to say no, but everyone was already cheering and heading toward the trail. Against my better judgment, I followed. The path leading into the forest was narrow and overgrown. The sound of the party faded quickly behind us, replaced by the crunch of leaves and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. Someone's flashlight flickered, and another person laughed nervously. "Which way is it?" I asked. Emily pointed ahead. "Just keep going straight until you see the clearing. The cabin should be near a big oak tree." The deeper we went, the more uneasy I felt. The air was colder, damper. My breath came out in white clouds. The forest was deathly still. No crickets, no wind, just our footsteps. After about 10 minutes, we reached a small clearing. The ground was uneven, and the air smelled faintly of ash. In the center, half buried under leaves and moss, were the remains of what must have been the cabin: rotted wood, collapsed beams, and a rusted metal stove lying on its side. "Whoa," Tyler said. "This is it." Someone shone a flashlight toward the far corner of the ruins, where a blackened doorway still stood. "Creepy," a girl whispered. Emily knelt down and brushed dirt off an old brick foundation. "They say this is where the fire started," she said. "People who come here claim to see faces in the ashes." As soon as she said that, I felt something shift. It wasn't a sound, exactly, more like a weight in the air, a sudden heaviness that made my stomach drop. Tyler noticed it too. "Did you guys hear that?" Everyone stopped talking. The woods were silent again. Then, somewhere in the distance, came a faint sound, like someone whispering. It was so quiet, I thought I imagined it at first. But then it came again, closer this time. A voice, soft and broken, almost like a child saying something. "What the hell?" one of the girls said. The flashlight beam swung wildly, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows. Tyler laughed nervously. Probably some kids messing with us. But I wasn't convinced. The sound didn't move the way a voice should. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Let's head back," I said quietly. "This place gives me the creeps." "Hang on," Emily said. "I want a picture first." She and Tyler posed in front of the ruins while someone snapped a few photos. Then, without warning, one of the flashlights went out. "Hey, quit it," someone said. But when the light flicked back on, the person holding it, Ryan, I think his name was gone. At first, we thought he'd just moved or was hiding. "Ryan?" Tyler called. No answer. We spread out a bit, shining our lights through the trees. Nothing. Then I heard it again, the whisper. But this time I could make out the words. "Help us." It was faint, like it came from the ground itself. I froze. "Tyler," I said, "we need to go. Now." Before anyone could respond, Ryan stumbled back into the clearing, but something was off. His eyes were wide, unfocused, and he was covered in dirt. "Where were you?" Emily asked. He didn't answer. He just stood there, trembling, staring at the burned doorway. "Ryan?" Tyler stepped closer. Ryan suddenly screamed. It wasn't just fear, it was raw, blood-curdling terror. He turned and bolted into the trees. "Ryan!" someone yelled, chasing after him. But when they reached the spot he disappeared into, he was gone again. That was enough for me. "I'm leaving," I said, already backing toward the path. Tyler hesitated. "We can't just—" "Yes, we can," I snapped. "Guess we'll call someone when we get back." Reluctantly, the others followed. We half ran, half stumbled back through the woods, the path barely visible in the weak flashlight beams. The moment the lights from the bonfire came into view again, I felt like I could breathe. When we got back, the party was still going, but the energy felt different. A few people asked where we'd been, and when we said someone was missing, the music stopped. "Missing?" Emily's brother asked. "What do you mean?" We explained everything, the whispering, Ryan's scream, the way he vanished. He frowned. There's no phone signal out here, but we'll drive into town and call it in. That's what we did. The police came out later that night, searched the woods, found nothing. They said Ryan probably got lost and would turn up in the morning. He didn't. The next day, I went through the pictures Emily had taken on her phone. In one of them, the one of her and Tyler in front of the cabin, there was something behind them. At first, I thought it was smoke, but when I zoomed in, it looked like a face. Pale, distorted, eyes hollow, and mouth open in a silent scream. I showed Emily. She started crying. Over the next few weeks, strange things started happening. Tyler said he'd hear scratching on his bedroom door at night. I started waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, feeling like someone was standing beside my bed. Once, I swear I heard whispering in my closet. Then, one night, Tyler didn't come home. I found his car still in the driveway, keys in the ignition. The front door was unlocked. I went inside, calling his name. No answer. His room was dark, the air cold. The closet door was open a few inches. I don't know why, but I reached out and pulled it all the way open. Inside, the walls were covered in dirt, finger marks, like someone had clawed their way out. I stumbled back, heart racing, when I noticed something on his desk. His phone. The screen was cracked but still lit. The last photo taken was from inside the woods. It was blurry, but I could see trees, darkness, and at the center of the frame, a small figure. A little girl. Her face was the same one from the picture at the cabin. Tyler was never found. Neither was Ryan. I moved out of Maple Hollow a month later, but even now, I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. hearing whispers I can't explain. Every Halloween since, I've received a text from an unknown number. Always the same photo, Tyler and Emily standing by the cabin. Only now, there's someone else in the picture with them. Someone pale, someone smiling, and every year the face looks a little more like mine. Story, the end. It was Halloween night in 2018, and the air in Maple Hollow, Indiana had that unmistakable October bite to it, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke, wet leaves, and cold earth. I was 24 and had recently taken a job as a security guard at the old Fairmont Plaza, a once bustling mall that had been mostly abandoned for over a decade. The property was being converted into a storage complex, and my job was to make sure vandals or curious teens didn't break in. The owners didn't pay much, but I didn't care. I liked being alone. I was still getting over a bad breakup and honestly preferred the silence to the noise of a crowded apartment or the pitying stares of friends who didn't know what to say. The first few weeks were uneventful, just the sound of rats, dripping pipes, and the occasional creak of old metal. But on Halloween night, something changed. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ran until 6 a.m. The supervisor had left early, warning me that kids like to sneak in on Halloween, especially since there were old rumors about the mall being haunted. Supposedly, back in the early 2000s, a kid went missing there during a Halloween event, and his body was never found. Locals said he'd been seen wandering the halls even after the mall shut down, still wearing his little ghost costume. I didn't believe any of it. But as I sat in that dimly lit security office surrounded by dusty cameras, I couldn't help but feel the weight of that empty building pressing down on me. At around midnight, the first noise came, a soft echo that rolled through the long, empty corridors. It sounded like a ball bouncing. I checked the monitors. Nothing. The mall was pitch dark except for the emergency lights near the exits. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out. The sound seemed to be coming from near the old food court. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't just one bounce. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as if someone was rolling a ball and waiting for it to come back. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed through the space. No response. I swung my light across the broken tiles and old tables, and there by the old fountain, I saw it. A red rubber ball. It rolled toward me, slow and steady, then stopped a few feet away. I froze. It was too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had pushed it. I scanned the area again. No one. Just my footsteps and the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then I heard laughter. It wasn't loud. It was faint, childlike, but it came from behind one of the empty storefronts. I shined my flashlight there, my hand trembling slightly. "Who's there?" The laughter stopped. The old Sweet Treats candy shop stood empty, its window displays covered in grime and spider webs. I stepped closer, shining the light through the broken glass door. Inside, I saw movement, small, quick, like someone ducking behind the counter. Kid, if you're in there, you shouldn't be, I said, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. It's not safe. No answer. I took a step inside. The air smelled like dust and old sugar. My boots crunched on broken candy wrappers and shattered glass. The flashlight beam caught something on the wall. Handprints. Small ones. Smudged in what looked like dirt or something darker. I crouched trying to make sense of it when the ball rolled in behind me. Slowly. Silently. That's when I heard it again, right behind me. A whisper. Do you want to play? I spun around, the light shaking in my hand. No one. Just the ball. I backed out of the store, trying to keep my breathing steady. My chest felt tight, like the air had turned thick. I radioed my supervisor, but it went to static. I tried my phone. No signal. I didn't want to admit it, but something about that place felt wrong, like it was breathing. The walls seemed to hum, the shadows felt alive, and that damn ball, it was sitting in the middle of the hallway again, right where I'd left it. I turned to head back to the office. That's when I saw the shape standing at the far end of the corridor. It was small, maybe the size of a child. It stood perfectly still under a flickering light, wearing what looked like a white sheet over its body. A ghost costume, simple and dirty. The edges were torn, and I could just barely make out dark stains near the bottom. My voice cracked. Hey, you're not supposed to be here. No response. It just stood there. Then slowly, it tilted its head to one side. I started walking toward it, flashlight steady. My boots echoed in the empty hall. When I got within about 10 feet, the light flickered, and the figure was gone. The hallway was empty again. I turned, heart pounding, and the ball hit my boot. It came from behind me. I didn't wait. I ran back to the office and locked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the flashlight twice. I checked the monitors, flipping through the feeds, trying to find something. On one of the cameras, the one overlooking the east corridor, I saw it again. The small figure, standing perfectly still. Only now it wasn't alone. Behind it, barely visible in the dark, stood a taller shadow. It wasn't human-shaped exactly. It was elongated, its arms too long, its head tilted back as if it was watching the ceiling. I watched, paralyzed, as the smaller figure turned slowly toward the camera. Even through the grainy black and white feed, I could see the eyes, or what should have been eyes. Two hollow black voids staring straight into the lens. Then the feed cut out. The lights in the office flickered. The air grew cold, so cold I could see my breath. I backed into the corner, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. Then, softly, like a whisper through the vents, I found you. The flashlight died. I don't remember how long I stayed frozen there. Minutes? Hours? I just remember waking up to sunlight filtering through the cracked blinds. My flashlight was on the floor. The monitors were blank. My phone was dead. I left that place without clocking out, without saying a word. I quit the next day. But the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, the property manager called me. He asked if I'd seen anything strange while I worked there. When I hesitated, he said, "We had a team go in to start renovations. They found something in the old maintenance hallway." "What kind of something?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "A small skeleton. Looked like a child. They said it was wearing what looked like a Halloween costume, a sheet." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I hung up, quit my security job entirely, and moved back to my hometown. I still dream about that mall sometimes. The echoing ball, the laughter, that whisper behind me. And every year on Halloween night, no matter where I am, I hear it again. Soft, playful, almost too close. Do you want to play? Story the end. It was Halloween night in 2019, the first year I'd spent away from my hometown. I'd just moved to a small rental house in upstate New York, about 20 minutes outside Syracuse, where I was starting my new job as a graphic designer. The neighborhood was quiet, rows of older houses with sagging porches and maple trees that dropped thick, wet leaves all over the cracked sidewalks. Most of the homes were decorated for Halloween, but in that sleepy kind of way. Paper ghosts in windows, a few jack-o'-lanterns with flickering tea lights. I hadn't planned on doing anything for the holiday. I didn't know anyone yet, and I figured I'd just stay in, watch some movies, and hand out candy to the neighborhood kids. Around 6:30, I turned on the porch light, filled a bowl with miniature Snickers and Kit Kats, and set it by the door. The first few groups came quickly. Tiny princesses, little monsters, and a boy in a skeleton mask who kept saying "thank you" too loudly. It was normal, harmless, the kind of nostalgia you feel when you realize you're the adult now. Around 8 o'clock, things started to slow down. The rain had picked up, cold and steady, and most of the parents were calling it a night. I was about to bring the candy in when I saw someone walking down the street, alone. It was a tall figure wearing an old-fashioned mask, the kind you might see in a carnival from the 1920s, with a white, featureless face and hollow black eyes. The costume was strange. No color, no accessories, just a dark coat that reached the ground. They walked right up to my driveway and stopped. I tried to play it off like any other trick-or-treater. "Nice costume," I said, forcing a laugh. "You're the last one tonight, I think." They didn't respond. They just tilted their heads slightly like they were studying me. The silence stretched long enough that I felt my stomach twist. I grabbed a handful of candy and held it out. "Here you go, man." Still nothing. The figure just stood there in the rain, water dripping from their mask, pooling around their boots. Then, after what felt like a full minute, they turned and started walking down the street, slow and steady until they disappeared around the corner. I told myself it was just some edgy teen trying to creep people out. But the image stuck with me, the empty, painted eyes, the way they'd tilted their head like they knew something I didn't. When I went back inside, I noticed something on my front step, a single piece of folded paper, soaked through from the rain. I brought it in, unfolded it carefully, and saw one word written in messy black ink: "Stay." I should have thrown it away right then, but I didn't. I left it on the counter, telling myself it was part of the trick. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around 10, I locked up, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately place. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a tap. Then another. Then 3 more, evenly spaced. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window near my bed. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. The curtains were half closed, the faint orange glow from the streetlight leaking through the gaps. I listened hard. Tap, tap. I pulled the curtains aside just enough to see out. At first there was nothing, just the wet street and the sway of tree branches. Then in the faint reflection of the glass, I saw movement, a pale shape standing at the edge of the yard, the mask. It was the same figure from before, standing completely still, facing the house. I jumped back, breathing hard. I didn't want to believe it. I turned off my lamp, crouched by the window, and peeked again. The yard was empty. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I went out front. There were footprints in the mud, deep, heavy ones that led from the sidewalk to my bedroom window. I called the police. They sent someone out who took a report but didn't seem too concerned. "Probably just a Halloween prank," the officer said. "People like to mess around this time of year." But the footprints didn't lead back to the street. They just stopped, mid-yard, like whoever made them vanished into thin air. That evening, I went to the local grocery store. When I got back, the folded paper I'd left on the counter was gone. I tore the place apart looking for it. Kitchen, living room, even under the couch. Nothing. I started to convince myself maybe I'd thrown it out and forgotten. But when I went to bed that night, there was another note waiting for me on my pillow. Same handwriting, same black ink. It said, "Still here." That's when the fear stopped feeling like a prank and started feeling real. The next few nights were tense. Every creak, every gust of wind felt personal. Around 2 a.m. one night, I woke to a strange noise. Soft, uneven scraping, like someone dragging something heavy along the siding of the house. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the bed, flicked it on, and aimed it toward the window. The sound stopped. But when I leaned closer, I saw faint streaks running down the glass, dark, greasy fingerprints. The following morning, I packed an overnight bag and stayed at a coworker's apartment in town. I told her someone was messing with me, that maybe a neighbor was pulling some elaborate joke. She offered to drive by the next day to check on my place. When she did, she called me immediately. "There's something on your porch," she said. "What?" "It's a pumpkin, I think." I told her to send me a picture. When she did, my stomach dropped. It wasn't like any pumpkin I'd ever seen. It was blackened and rotten-looking, half collapsed, with something carved into the side, 2 words etched deep, "Too late." She didn't go near it. Neither did I. I called the police again and they sent a patrol to check the property. When they got there, the pumpkin was gone. Only a dark stain remained on the wood where it had been sitting. That night, I stayed on my coworker's couch again. Around midnight, her apartment building's fire alarm went off. We ran outside with the other tenants. The alarm shut off after a minute. No smoke, no fire. Just a false trigger, they said. But when we came back inside, I noticed something on the floor by her door. A wet footprint. Large, bare, streaked with mud. It wasn't hers. She freaked out and called security. They checked the hallway cameras, but the feed for that entire hour was corrupted, static-filled, unusable. I left town the next morning. I told work I needed some time off and drove 3 hours south to stay with my cousin in Pennsylvania. Her house was out in the countryside, surrounded by open fields. I figured if someone had followed me, there'd be nowhere for them to hide out there. The first few nights were peaceful. No notes, no sounds, no pumpkins. I started to relax a little, thinking maybe whatever it was had ended. Then, on November 6th, I woke up around 4 a.m. to the sound of something moving outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like a slow shuffle across gravel. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The yard was empty, just fog rolling over the grass. But as I looked closer, I saw something near the barn, a faint glow, like candlelight. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped outside, bare heart racing. The air was cold and thick with mist. I followed the faint light until I reached the side of the barn. That's when I saw it. A pumpkin, black and twisted like before, but this one had a candle inside. The flame flickered weakly, illuminating a word carved into the surface. Found. I heard something behind me then. Soft, deliberate footsteps. I spun around, shining my flashlight across the yard, but the beam caught only fog. I ran back to the house, locked every door, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, the pumpkin was gone. We found no footprints, no sign anyone had been there. My cousin called the local sheriff, who listened politely but didn't sound convinced. Could be some kids messing around, he said. Halloween hangers-on. But that night, my cousin's dog wouldn't stop barking at the front window. When she went to check, she froze and called me over. On the porch railing, nailed through the wood, was another folded paper. It said, "Next year." That was the last I heard or saw of anything. Until tonight. It's exactly 1 year later. I moved again, this time across the country, to a new job and a new apartment in Colorado. I didn't decorate for Halloween. I didn't buy candy. I didn't even tell anyone where I was spending the evening. It's nearly midnight now. The streets outside are quiet, the leftover smell of burned pumpkins and wet leaves drifting through the air. I've been sitting by the window for an hour, trying to convince myself I'm safe this time. Then, just a few minutes ago, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. No message, just a single photo. It's a picture of my building, taken from outside, and sitting at the bottom of the steps in the faint glow of the streetlight is a small black pumpkin. Story, the end. It was the kind of Halloween night that seemed ordinary at first. Clear skies, a bright harvest moon, and the smell of fallen leaves mingling with faint traces of candy corn. I had just started my first semester at a small university in Ohio and decided to stay on campus for Halloween. Most of my friends had gone home for the weekend, leaving me alone in my dorm. The dorm itself was old, built in the 1960s, with narrow hallways, creaking floors, and dorm rooms that were surprisingly drafty. I liked it when I first moved in. It had character. But that Halloween night, everything felt off. I spent the evening in my room, playing video games and handing out leftover candy to a few underclassmen who wandered down the hall. Around 10 p.m., the hallway emptied. I was alone. That's when I heard it. The faint sound of a door creaking, like someone was slowly opening a door down the hall. I froze. Everyone had gone home. There shouldn't have been anyone here. I got up, peeked out my door, but saw nothing. The hallway was empty, silent except for the hum of the heating system. I shrugged, thinking it was just the old building settling, and went back to my game. A few minutes later, there it was again, creaking, this time closer, as if someone was walking down the hall toward my room. My stomach tightened. I called out, but my voice barely carried. "Hello? Anyone there?" No answer. The sound stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, and then it moved on, fading down the hall. I locked my door anyway and tried to convince myself I was imagining things. About an hour later, the temperature in my room dropped dramatically. I could see my breath in the air, even though my dorm didn't get that cold in the fall. The lights flickered, then went out completely. My phone was dead, no notifications, nothing. Total darkness. I grabbed a flashlight from my backpack and shone it around the room. That's when I saw it, written on my mirror in condensation, faint but readable. I see you. I spun around, heart racing. No one was there. The message seemed to vanish as I blinked, like it had never been fully there. I backed away, hitting the wall, fumbling for my phone. The flashlight flickered, and I heard it, a soft whisper, just beyond my door, barely audible. Don't leave. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. I considered calling campus security, but I hesitated. If someone was actually here, calling them might provoke them. Then the knocking started. Soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, deliberate. Someone or something was trying to get in. I backed into the corner of my room, clutching my phone like a shield, the whispers growing louder. They weren't words I could understand, just low, guttural sounds that seemed to crawl along the walls, vibrating through the floor. I could feel it in my chest, a deep, pressing fear, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I remembered the small window at the back of my room. With shaking hands, I opened it and looked out. The courtyard was empty, completely silent under the silver glow of the moon. No one there. I was alone, and yet the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, moving inside my room. My flashlight flickered and went out, leaving me in total darkness. Then I felt it, a hand, cold, skeletal, pressing against my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around, but there was nothing there. The pressure lingered for a moment, and then it was gone. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk and swung it wildly, but the room was empty. The whispering stopped. The knocking stopped. Everything was silent again. I spent the rest of the night in the corner of my room, flashlight in hand, too terrified to sleep. When morning finally came, the room was warm, the lights worked, and nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. I thought maybe it was just a nightmare, a combination of being alone and the spooky Halloween atmosphere. But then I saw it. Again, faintly written on the mirror in the morning condensation. I'll be back. I never spent another Halloween alone in that dorm. I moved into a friend's apartment the following year. But even years later, every October, I can't shake the memory. The whispers, the cold hand, the message on the mirror, it was real. Something followed me that night. Something that existed in the shadows of the old dorm, waiting for the next person foolish enough to be alone. Story. The end. It was a Halloween night in upstate New York, the kind that feels colder than usual for October. The streets of my small town, Fairview, were almost deserted. Most kids had stuck close to neighborhoods with streetlights, leaving the older kids, like me and my friends, to seek out something more thrilling. That year was 17, and my friends, Eric, Lena, and Chris, convinced me to join them on what they called a real Halloween adventure. They wanted to explore the old Holloway Asylum, a decaying mental institution about 3 miles outside of town. It had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, after a series of fires and suspicious deaths had shut it down. Locals avoided it, calling it haunted, and warnings of strange noises and ghost sightings had circulated for decades. For teenagers looking for scares, it was perfect. We set out just after dusk, flashlights in hand, backpacks loaded with snacks and energy drinks, though the mood made it clear we wouldn't touch a bite. The path through the woods leading to the asylum was uneven, tangled with roots and brush, and the wind made the trees groan like tortured spirits. Our laughter was forced, brittle, and I could feel the tension rising as we approached the gates. Rusted and overgrown, the entrance had a swinging sign, still hanging on one hinge, reading, Holloway State Mental Institution. The main building was massive, with broken windows and doors hanging crookedly from rusted hinges. The paint had peeled away long ago, leaving the walls exposed to the wind and rain. The smell of rot hit us as soon as we entered, the musty scent of decay mixed with the faint tang of iron. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just old building smells, but something about it felt alive. We explored cautiously. The first floor had rows of rooms with remnants of furniture, wheelchairs overturned, and shattered medical equipment scattered across the floors. Lena, usually fearless, flinched at the sight of a rusted bed frame. whispering that it looked like someone had just left. Chris made a joke about the patients still haunting the halls, but even he sounded tense. We decided to go upstairs, where the nurses' quarters and old patient rooms were located. The stairs creaked under our weight, each step sounding unnervingly loud. The second floor was darker, narrower, and the air felt heavier, almost suffocating. That's when we heard it. The first sound. A soft, dragging noise from down the hall, like something being pulled across the floor. Probably a raccoon, Eric said, though his voice didn't carry conviction. We moved toward the sound, flashlights bouncing across the peeling wallpaper. The noise stopped abruptly as we entered a long corridor lined with empty rooms. Then came a whisper, low and chilling. "Don't be here." I froze. Lena grabbed my arm, and we all instinctively turned back toward the stairs. But something had changed. The air was colder, almost icy, and the flashlight beams flickered as if resisting our gaze. Then, from one of the rooms at the end of the hall, a door slammed shut. Not a creak, not a bang, but a deliberate, sharp slam. Chris muttered that we should leave, but Eric, ever the daredevil, insisted we check it out. The three of them moved toward the door, and I reluctantly followed. The hallway felt longer than it should have been. Shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the swinging of our lights. When we reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Eric pushed it open, and the room was dark. A faint outline of a bed could be seen, and something on it, or rather, someone was lying there. At first, I thought it was a mannequin left by pranksters, but as we stepped closer, it moved. Slowly, the head lifted, and I saw a face, pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, staring straight at us. We screamed. The figure didn't move, but seemed to grow taller, more solid. The whisper came again, louder. "Leave now." Panic set in. We ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs, but the asylum seemed different. Doors that had been opened before were now shut. Hallways twisted in ways that didn't make sense. I swear I could hear footsteps behind us. Not ours. Faster. Heavier. Chris tripped and fell, screaming as something invisible seemed to press down on his back. Lena grabbed him, and we dragged him up, but the sounds followed us. We reached the main lobby, hoping to find the exit, but the front doors were gone. In their place was a brick wall, cold and solid. The air felt thick, and the shadows grew longer, stretching unnaturally across the walls. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the top of the grand staircase. Pale, black-rimmed eyes, a mouth that seemed to move without sound. It raised a hand, pointing at us, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like someone had slammed a fist inside me. Eric screamed, trying to charge it, but his body stiffened and he collapsed. Lena and Chris tried to pull him up, but their hands passed through his body as if he were made of smoke. I ran toward them, but something yanked me backwards, spinning me around. I saw the figure again, closer this time, its eyes fixed on mine. My vision blurred, and I could hear dozens of whispers around me, all saying the same thing. "You don't belong here." Somehow I stumbled, running blindly, and I felt the night air on my face. I was outside. The asylum loomed behind me, silent and empty again, as if nothing had happened. Eric, Lena, and Chris were gone. I screamed their names, calling for anyone, but the woods were empty. I ran back to town, panting, shaking, and drenched in sweat despite the cold. I tried to tell my parents, but they dismissed it as a Halloween scare, imagining things in the dark. Days passed, but I never saw my friends again. The police investigated, but there was no trace of them. No footprints, no evidence they had ever been at the asylum. Only my story remained, and even that sounded unbelievable. Years later, I returned to the outskirts of Fairview, hoping for closure. The Holloway Asylum was still standing, decaying more with each year. I approached it cautiously, and as I did, I heard whispers in the wind, faint but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come back." I didn't stay. I never went near that place again. Halloween is a time for fun, candy, and costumes, but for me, it's a reminder of that night. A night when I learned that curiosity can open doors that should remain closed, that some places are not just abandoned but inhabited by something that waits patiently for the unwary, something that can take people and leave no trace. Even now, I hear whispers when the wind blows through my neighborhood, a soft, insistent voice, "Don't be here." And I know that somewhere in the shadows, my friends are still there, trapped by the asylum, calling for help that no one will ever hear. Story the end. It was late October in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. a place where the streets were lined with dying maples, their leaves bleeding orange and brown under the dim yellow glow of the streetlights. Every year, the town threw a Halloween festival at the old community center, and people came from neighboring counties to join. It was small town tradition, pumpkin carving, hay rides, a haunted maze run by local teens, but that year, something about it felt different. Maybe it was the weather. The sky had stayed gray for days, and the air was colder than usual. The wind carried a sharpness that felt wrong, biting, and almost electric. Mara was 24, living back at home with her parents after college. She'd graduated with a degree in art history but hadn't found a stable job yet, so she was working at a small antique shop downtown. Her mom kept saying it was temporary, but Mara was starting to feel the weight of it being permanent. That Halloween weekend, she agreed to help at the festival, handing out cider, running a booth, whatever they needed. Her best friend, Jordan, convinced her to join because, as he put it, you can't skip the only fun thing this town does. By 7 that night, the center was buzzing with families. Kids in costumes ran around shrieking, adults chatted over hot drinks, and the faint sound of laughter and country music drifted from the speakers near the corn maze. The air smelled like cinnamon and hay. It should have been comforting. But even as she smiled at the parents and helped fill cups, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started with the fog. Around 8:30, a heavy fog rolled in from the forest line that bordered the community center. It came fast, like a tide washing in. The air went still and the laughter seemed to dull, fading behind the low hum of the fog machines. Only this fog wasn't from the machines. People commented about how cool it looked, assuming it was part of the decorations. But Mara saw it crawl across the ground, too thick, too real. It swallowed the booths, the trees, even the sound of the crickets. She was standing near the cider booth when she noticed someone across the field, a tall figure in a black cloak, standing perfectly still just outside the light. At first, she thought it was someone in costume, but when she blinked, the figure seemed closer. She looked away for just a second to refill someone's cup, and when she turned back, it was gone. Later, when she told Jordan, he laughed it off. "Probably someone just trying to spook people," he said. "It's Halloween, after all." But the fog didn't go away. It thickened. By 9, you could barely see 10 feet ahead. Kids started crying because they'd lost sight of their parents. Volunteers tried to calm everyone down, but there was a tension spreading like static through the crowd. Then the power went out. The lights flickered once, twice, and everything went black. The music cut off mid-song. A few people screamed. Phones flashed on instantly, their beams cutting through the fog in thin, shaky lines. Somewhere near the maze, Mara heard a man shouting for help. The sound was strangled, desperate. Then another scream, a child's this time. The town sheriff was there, helping with security, and started yelling for everyone to stay calm and gather near the building. But the fog was so thick now it muffled his voice. People started pushing and running in random directions, bumping into each other, trying to find their families. Mara grabbed Jordan's hand. "We need to get inside," she said. He nodded, pulling her toward the glow of someone's phone light. But as they moved, she felt it, something brushing against her coat, dragging across her back like fingertips. She spun around, the flashlight beam shaking, but there was no one there. Then she heard whispering. It wasn't one voice, it was several, layered, low, and just on the edge of hearing. It sounded like words but distorted, like they were underwater. Mara, her name. She froze. Mara. It came again, this time from the left. Jordan noticed her face. "What is it?" She didn't answer. The whispers grew louder, circling them. Then suddenly a figure moved through the fog, stumbling out of the darkness. It was a teenage boy, maybe 16, his costume torn. His face was white with terror. "There's something in the maze," he gasped. "Something grabbed Kyle. It took him." "What do you mean, took him?" Jordan asked. The boy shook his head. "It's not people. I don't know what it is. It's in there." They didn't have time to ask more. From the direction of the maze came another scream, this one long, raw, and cut off midway. Someone shouted, "Everyone get inside now." People flooded toward the community center doors, tripping, shouting, dropping their phones. Mara and Jordan followed, shoving through the fog. She kept her eyes low, focusing on the small patch of ground she could see. The whispers were still there, now mixed with the panicked voices around them. When they reached the door, Jordan held it open as people pushed through. Mara glanced back one last time. In the fog, maybe 20 feet away, stood that same tall figure again, black cloak, still as stone. Only now she could see its face, pale and expressionless, with hollow eyes that seemed to reflect no light. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided forward silently, like the fog itself was carrying it. Mara stumbled inside, slamming the door behind her. Inside, chaos reigned. The power was still out, and the room was lit only by candles and flashlights. Kids were crying, people were calling names, the sheriff was trying to keep order. Someone had called 911, but the fog was apparently so thick the roads were barely drivable. Mara and Jordan found a corner and sat down, trying to process what had happened. "It's just some prank," Jordan said, though his voice trembled. "Someone's screwing with us." Mara shook her head. "No. That thing? I saw it. It wasn't a person." An older man near them, a local farmer named Walt, spoke up. "You kids remember the stories?" he asked. "About the field out there?" "What stories?" Jordan asked. "The Hollow Man," Walt said. "My granddad used to talk about him. Said back in the 1800s, before the town was built, there was a preacher who went crazy during a drought. Thought the town was cursed. Started a fire that burned down half the settlement, killed everyone, including himself. Folks said his body was found with his eyes burned out. They buried him somewhere near where that corn maze sits now. And every few decades, when the weather turns wrong, people say he walks again out of the fog, looking for souls to replace the ones he lost." "Come on," Jordan said, forcing a laugh. "You're telling ghost stories right now?" But Walt didn't smile. "I'm telling you what I know. My uncle went missing back in Situ during a storm like this. They never found him. Cops said he wandered off, but..." He trailed off, staring at the window. "Fog like this don't come natural. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows. The sound made everyone jump. Someone at the door yelled that they saw movement outside. Figures walking through the fog, moving slow, circling the building. People panicked again. The sheriff ordered everyone to stay inside, lock the doors, and stay away from the windows. But then came a loud bang. Something hitting the side of the building, hard. The walls vibrated. Kids screamed. Another bang. Then another. Mara gripped Jordan's arm so tightly her nails dug into his skin. The banging moved along the wall toward the back of the building like something was circling them. Then came a sound that froze everyone in place. Scratching. Long, deliberate scratches along the wood, like fingernails or claws. A volunteer shined a flashlight toward the noise. The beam hit the window for a split second, and Mara saw something. Pale hands pressed against the glass from the outside. Dozens of them. Then the glass cracked. The sheriff shouted, "Everyone to the basement!" There was a stampede toward the stairs. The basement was an old storm shelter, built during the Cold War. They crammed inside, locking the heavy door. It was dark, damp, and smelled of mildew. Some people were sobbing quietly. Others sat in silence, clutching their children. Mara sat with her back against the wall, her heart hammering. Jordan held her hand, whispering that it would be okay. But then from above they heard footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging footsteps moving across the floor. "Is that the sheriff?" someone whispered. But the sheriff was with them. The footsteps stopped directly above the basement door. Then came 3 knocks. Slow, measured, no one moved. Then a voice. It was soft, deep, and wrong. "Let me in." Everyone froze. The voice sounded almost human, but not quite. It was off, like someone imitating speech without understanding it. A woman started praying quietly. The sheriff held his gun, pointing it toward the door. The voice came again. "Mara." It said her name. Her blood went cold. Everyone turned to her. She couldn't speak. The voice repeated it slower this time. "Mara, open the door." She shook her head violently. "No, no." Then came a deafening slam on the door. The metal shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Another slam. Harder. People screamed. The sheriff fired his gun upward. 3 deafening shots. The sound echoed through the small space. The slamming stopped. Silence. For what felt like hours, no one moved. Finally, the fog outside started to thin. When they eventually dared to open the door, dawn was breaking. The fog had mostly lifted. The community center was trashed, tables overturned, decorations shredded. But no one was there. Not the volunteers who'd been upstairs, not the people near the exits. 27 people were missing. The maze was empty except for torn bits of clothing, muddy footprints that led nowhere, and patches of dead grass shaped like human silhouettes. The sheriff stayed until backup arrived. They searched the forest for days. They found nothing. Weeks passed. The town grieved, and theories spread: mass hysteria, gas leak, kidnapping. But no one had answers. The fog never came back. Life, in its strange way, continued. Mara moved to the city, got a job, tried to forget. But sometimes when she drove home late at night and the air grew damp, she'd see fog creeping over the asphalt, and in it, just at the edge of her headlights, a tall figure standing still. It never moved, never chased, never spoke. But it was always there, watching, waiting. Story the end. It started innocently enough, the kind of Halloween that feels like it's straight out of a postcard. Crisp autumn air, leaves crunching underfoot, and streets lined with houses decked in orange and purple lights. I was 26, living in a small American town in Ohio, and this was my first Halloween alone since moving out of my parents' house. I had just rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, and it was a place that had been vacant for a few months before I moved in. The apartment itself wasn't particularly old, maybe built in the early 90s, but it had that faintly neglected smell of abandoned carpet and stale air, like it had been forgotten and left to breathe its own dust. I chalked it up to being normal for a unit that had been empty for a while. The first week passed uneventfully, though I noticed small things. Shadows in the corners of my apartment seemed darker than they should be, and at night I occasionally heard a faint scratching coming from the walls. I told myself it was probably just mice or the building settling. After all, I wasn't exactly in the city center. This was a quiet neighborhood, mostly older couples and families who had lived there for decades. Halloween night arrived. I had decided to stay in rather than go out and buy candy for trick-or-treaters. I wasn't expecting many anyway, as my building was tucked away on a side street. I made some chili, poured a glass of wine, and settled onto the couch with a horror movie marathon queued up. As the evening grew darker, I noticed the occasional knock on the door or the sound of little footsteps on the stairs, but nothing unusual for the holiday. Around 9:30 p.m., I went to the window to see if any trick-or-treaters had shown up. That's when I saw it, a figure standing across the street in front of one of the older houses. It was tall, thin, wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, and seemed to be staring directly at me. I froze. It was hard to tell if they had a mask on or if it was just their face partially obscured by the shadows. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Assuming it was just someone walking by, I shook it off and went back to the movie. A few minutes later, I heard the doorbell ring. Confused, I walked over and looked through the peephole. No one was there. Just empty steps and the quiet night. I opened the door anyway. Nothing. No candy bag, no note, just the cold autumn air. Uneasy, I closed the door and locked it, telling myself it was probably a prank or some kids messing around. Then the scratching started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the door. Slow, deliberate scratches like someone was dragging their nails across the wood. I froze, my heart hammering. The scratching went on for a few seconds, then stopped. I didn't hear anyone running away. I called my best friend Mike, who lived about 15 minutes away. "Hey, Mike," I whispered. "I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but someone's at my door, or was at my door, I think." He laughed nervously. "It's Halloween, man. Probably just some kids messing around. Don't overthink it." "I know, but..." I trailed off, not wanting to sound ridiculous. "Look, if you're really freaked out, just lock all your doors, sit tight, watch your movies, and don't answer it. That's all." I hung up, but the sense of unease didn't leave me. I double-checked the locks, closed the blinds, and tried to focus on the movie. That's when I noticed movement outside the window again. There was the figure, standing just across the street, motionless, staring straight at me. My apartment was on the second floor, but there was a large tree in front of my window. The figure was partially hidden, but I could see the hood drawn tight, and the silhouette, it was wrong. There was something off about the way they stood, like the angle of the shoulders wasn't natural, like the body was too stiff. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I told them I wasn't sure if someone was outside my apartment, but they assured me an officer would drive by. I stayed behind the curtains, watching. The figure didn't move. Minutes felt like hours. Then, slowly, they raised one hand, palm flat, and pressed it against the window. Not the one facing the street, but the side window. I realized then that the person had somehow circled the building without me noticing. My blood ran cold. The scratching came again, but this time from the side window. Hard, insistent. I backed away, fumbling for anything I could use to defend myself. The 911 operator told me to stay on the line, to stay inside, and that an officer was en route. Suddenly, the figure moved. They stepped back into the shadows, out of view. I didn't hear anything for what felt like a long moment, and then I heard footsteps on the balcony. My apartment had a small balcony off the living room. My heart stopped. I didn't have a sliding door, just a window I rarely opened, but whoever it was trying to get in. The operator asked if I could safely leave through the front door. I shook my head even though she couldn't see me. There was no way. The person was out there. My only option was to grab something heavy, a chair, maybe a lamp, and wait. The footsteps stopped. For a terrifying moment, everything was silent except for my own breathing. Then a voice whispered, soft, low, almost a hiss, "I see you." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I pressed myself into the corner of the room, trying to make myself as small as possible. The voice repeated, louder this time, "I see you." And then silence again. The police arrived 5 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. I ran to the door, opened it, and they were already sweeping the area. "We didn't see anyone," one officer said. "Any idea where they might have gone?" "No," I whispered. They were outside my window." They checked around the building, looked up at my window, and then shrugged. "Maybe someone was just hiding, playing a prank. There's nobody here now. We'll drive by a few times for you, okay?" I nodded, but I knew it wasn't a prank. I could feel it in my gut. Something had been watching me, stalking me. The officers left, promising to keep an eye out. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the windows, double-checked the locks, and kept my phone in my hand. The next morning, I found long scratches along the frame of the side window, deep, deliberate. I took pictures and showed them to the police, but they said it could have been anything, a branch, an animal, or some vandalism. But I knew it wasn't natural. The next few days were tense. I didn't leave the apartment much. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper of wind made me jump. Then I started noticing things missing. Small things at first. My keys, a pair of scissors, some kitchen utensils. I blamed myself for misplacing them until one morning I found my apartment door unlocked, even though I was certain I had locked it. I started setting up a camera, just a small, cheap security camera facing the front door and side window. I wanted proof. I couldn't explain the feeling that I wasn't alone. A week later, on a rainy evening, I reviewed the footage. My stomach turned cold. The video showed the figure, tall, hooded, creeping along the side of the building. They paused in front of the window, pressed their hand against the glass, then disappeared before I could see their face. But the weird thing was their movement. They didn't walk. They glided, almost as if floating a few inches off the ground. I showed the footage to Mike. He went pale. "Dude, that's not normal. You need to move. Now." I wanted to laugh, shake it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at his place. My apartment? I didn't go back. Not for a week. When I finally returned, I noticed the scratches had multiplied. They weren't just on the side window. Now the balcony railing was marred, the door frame scratched, as if someone or something had been trying every possible way in. I decided to change apartments. I couldn't handle it anymore. The final straw was when I was cleaning out the old apartment one evening and noticed something etched into the wall behind the couch. At first, I thought it was a smear, but as I wiped it, letters emerged. "I see you. Always." I left that apartment immediately. I don't know who or what was there, and I don't want to. But I know this: Halloween in that town will never feel the same. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, now I hear it differently. Now I know someone, something, can watch you without ever being seen, waiting for the perfect moment to remind you that it's always there. Years have passed and I've moved far away. I still get chills every October, and every time I see someone standing too long in the shadows, I feel that same cold grip of fear. And every Halloween, when the wind scratches against my windows, I can't help but wonder, did it follow me? Story the end. It was Halloween night in 2014, and the entire neighborhood of Maple Hollow was glowing with porch lights and plastic pumpkins. Kids were out in droves, tiny witches, superheroes, vampires, and zombies running up and down the sidewalks, clutching their candy bags, their laughter carrying through the crisp autumn air. The leaves crackled under their feet, and every so often you could hear the creak of a gate or the bark of a distant dog. It was the kind of night that looked perfect from the outside. Small town America, warm lights against the chilly dark. But that Halloween became something else entirely for me, something I still don't like to talk about out loud. Back then, I was 22, recently graduated from community college, and still living with my mom in that same neighborhood. I had plans to move out, but things were tight. My mom was a nurse working overnight shifts, and since Halloween was her busiest night of the season at the hospital, I volunteered to stay home to hand out candy and keep an eye on the house. It had been our tradition when I was younger. We always carved pumpkins together, roasted the seeds, and sat by the window watching the trick-or-treaters. This year, though, I did it alone. By 7:30, I'd gone through almost half a bowl of candy. Kids came in clusters, their costumes reflecting the light from our porch. Parents lingered on the sidewalks, scrolling through their phones or chatting with each other. Nothing unusual, nothing eerie, the normal hum of Halloween. Around 8, things began to quiet down. The younger kids had gone home, and the older ones hadn't started their mischief yet. I was about to close the door for a bit when I noticed something across the street. At first, I thought it was just another late group. There were 3 of them, figures walking side by side, but slower than the rest. Their costumes were strange, all black, no details or masks that I could make out. The one in the middle carried something, a pumpkin maybe, but it didn't glow like the others I'd seen. They didn't talk, didn't laugh, just walked. I waited for them to approach my house, but when they reached the driveway, they stopped. They stood there for a few seconds facing me. I felt that weird prickle on the back of my neck, the one that tells you someone's watching you too closely. I smiled nervously and said, "Happy Halloween," but they didn't move or say anything. They just stood there, the middle one holding that dark pumpkin or whatever it was. I reached into the candy bowl. "You guys want some candy or what?" Still nothing. Then, all at once, they turned and walked down the street, slowly fading into the dark. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. Maybe they were teenagers pulling a prank, I thought. Kids get weird on Halloween. Still, something about the way they moved, it was synchronized, deliberate. Too calm. I tried to shake it off, closed the door, and went to watch TV. Around 9:15, the doorbell rang again. I figured it was the older kids finally making their rounds, so I grabbed the candy bowl and went to the door. When I opened it, no one was there. Just the cool night air. I leaned out to check the porch, thinking someone might be hiding, but there was no sound, no footsteps. I turned to close the door, and that's when I noticed it. Something sitting on the top step. It was a pumpkin, but not one of mine. The thing was black, not painted black, but black like it had been burned, charred all over. It looked like something that had been dug out of a fire pit. The smell hit me first, like wet ashes and something metallic underneath. I nudged it with my foot. It was soft, almost spongy. When I bent down, I saw that it wasn't carved, but something had been scratched into the surface. A single number. 1. I thought it was a prank, maybe from those same 3 weirdos. But something about the smell bothered me. So I took a garbage bag from the kitchen, scooped the pumpkin into it, and tossed it in the trash bin out back. Then I locked the back door, double-checked the front, and turned off the porch light. I figured that would signal to everyone that I was done for the night. But sleep didn't come easily. Around 11, as I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard something. Faint, but distinct. A soft knock. Not on the front door. On the window. My room was on the first floor, facing the backyard. I froze, every muscle tightening at once. The knock came again. Slow, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I turned off my phone screen and sat there in the dark. My blinds were half open, and the glow from the streetlight outside spilled in just enough to outline the shape of my desk. I didn't move for nearly a full minute. Then I heard it again, closer to the edge of the glass this time. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself to get up, heart hammering in my chest. I reached for the blinds and pulled them down fast. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. Nothing outside, but the knocking stopped. That was it for me. I grabbed the baseball bat from my closet and stayed awake the rest of the night, flipping channels on the TV until the sun came up. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it. Halloween can do that to your brain. It plays with shadows and noise. I went out back to throw away some trash before my mom got home. When I lifted the lid of the garbage bin, I almost dropped it. The black pumpkin was gone. Not smashed, not stolen, just gone. The garbage bag I'd put it in was still there, but it was empty. A small dark stain spread across the bottom of the bin, like something had leaked or melted away. I remember standing there, staring, trying to process it when I noticed something else. A trail. Thin streaks of that same blackish residue leading away from the trash can across the grass and toward the side of the house, right up to my window. That's when I felt my chest tighten. I ran inside, locked every door, and called my mom. She picked up, groggy from the night shift, and tried to calm me down. "It's probably raccoons or some prank," she said. "Halloween brings out all kinds of nonsense." I didn't argue, but deep down, I knew raccoons don't leave footprints that look like that. They were long, narrow, almost human. The rest of that week was quiet. I avoided thinking about it, went to work, and tried to sleep with my window shut tight. By November 3rd, the decorations around the neighborhood started coming down. Halloween was officially over. But late that night, as I was taking out the trash again, I saw something down the street that stopped me cold. Those 3 figures. They were standing at the end of the road, just barely illuminated by the lamppost. Same all-black clothing, same slow stillness. They weren't facing me this time. They were facing the house across the street, Mrs. Connolly's place. I wanted to yell something, to break that frozen moment, but before I could, one of them slowly turned its head toward me. Not fast, like they were letting me know they'd noticed. I dropped the trash bag and bolted inside. That night, I slept in my mom's room with the door locked. I woke up around 3 to the sound of sirens outside. I ran to the window and saw red and blue lights flickering across the houses. There were police cars in front of Mrs. Connolly's home. She was an older woman, lived alone since her husband passed. I watched as they carried her out on a stretcher. She was covered in a sheet. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Someone said she'd had a heart attack. Others whispered it looked like something worse. The police didn't release much, but I overheard one officer telling another that the back door had been open when they got there, and that a strange black pumpkin was found on her porch, with the number 2 carved into it. After that, I didn't sleep for days. Every sound outside sent me scrambling for the blinds. I begged my mom to let me stay somewhere else, but she brushed it off. You can't let some local pranksters scare you. But by the 5th, I started noticing things again. Small things at first. The sound of footsteps outside at night. A faint scratching near the back door. The motion light flickering on and off. Then, one morning, I found muddy smears near the porch steps. They looked like handprints, too long and too thin. That night, I decided to stay awake again. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching through the front window. The street was still, the air heavy with fog. Around midnight, movement caught my eye. 3 shapes again, at the far end of the street. They walked slowly toward our house. I could barely breathe. When they reached the driveway, they stopped, just like before. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. One of them bent down and set something on the porch. Then they turned and walked away into the mist. I didn't go outside until morning. There, on the porch step, was another pumpkin. Same charred color, same burnt smell. Only this time, carved deeper into the side, was the number 3. I called the police that morning. They came out, took a report, and checked for footprints. One of the officers, a guy named Travis who'd grown up in the area, gave me a look when I told him about the figures. "We've gotten some calls," he said. "You're not the only one who's seen them." "What are they doing?" I asked. He hesitated. "So far, nothing we can prove. But people are spooked, especially after what happened across the street." They took the pumpkin as evidence and told me to keep my doors locked. That night, my mom insisted I go to my friend Josh's place to get out of the house. Josh lived about 20 minutes away, near a more rural stretch of road. He laughed when I told him what had been happening. "You're letting Halloween hangover get to your head?" he said. Still, he let me crash on his couch. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up thirsty. As I was getting some water from the kitchen, I glanced out the back window and froze. 3 figures stood by the tree line. I blinked, thinking maybe I was still half asleep, but they didn't vanish. They were closer than before, almost clear enough to make out the folds in their clothing. The middle one held something again, another blackened shape. I turned to wake Josh, but when I looked back, they were gone. The next morning I told him what I'd seen, but he brushed it off as a dream. Still, when he went outside later to grab the paper, he called me to the door. Sitting on his porch was another black pumpkin. Number 4. That's when Josh stopped laughing. We went to the police again, but by the time they came, the pumpkin had vanished. They started taking us seriously then, sending patrol cars through the area at night. But it didn't stop. Every few days, someone else in town reported the same thing. A black pumpkin left on their porch, always with the next number carved into it. By the time the news got wind of it, there were 7 reported across 3 neighborhoods. Some of the people who got them moved away. One man disappeared entirely, his car found abandoned on a dirt road near the woods. The 8th pumpkin appeared 2 weeks later at the old Miller farm on the outskirts of town. Nobody had lived there for years. The cops found it sitting on the porch steps, number 8 burned into its side. After that, the sightings stopped. No one saw the figures again. The pumpkins disappeared. The town moved on, mostly, but every Halloween since then, the air feels heavier, like something is waiting just beyond the streetlights. Last year, I finally moved out of Ohio, thinking distance would give me peace. But 2 nights ago, as I was coming home from work, there was something sitting on my apartment doorstep. A small, black pumpkin. The number 9 carved into it. I called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, it was gone. They checked security footage, but the camera above the door had glitched out between 11:32 and 11:47 p.m., the exact time I got home. And last night, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in years. Knock, 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 at my bedroom window. I live on the 2nd floor now. Story the end. It was Halloween night in a quiet suburban town in Ohio, 2014. The leaves were crisp and gold, the air had that dry chill that promised winter was close, and the streets were already filling with costumed kids carrying buckets and pillowcases. For most people, it was the same kind of night they looked forward to every year. Fake cobwebs, porch lights, laughter, and candy. But for me, that Halloween still haunts me because it was the night something impossible happened. Something that shouldn't exist outside of stories and old legends. At the time, I was 17 and working part-time at a small grocery store on the edge of town. I'd volunteered to take the Halloween shift, which ended around 10:30 p.m., mostly because I needed the money and I didn't care much for parties. My best friend, Matt, was supposed to swing by and pick me up after work. He was 2 years older, had his dad's old Dodge Ram, and was the kind of guy who found a way to make even the most boring night into a story worth telling. Around 9:45, things started slowing down at the store. The aisles were mostly empty, except for a few stragglers, parents grabbing last-minute candy, or kids who forgot to buy toilet paper for pranks. The loud hum of the refrigerator units filled the silence. Our night manager, Brenda, a woman in her 50s who always smelled like menthols, was counting down her till while humming Monster Mash. I remember glancing at the clock above the register, 9:53. That was when the power flickered. All the lights went out for a second, and the entire store was swallowed by darkness. The hum of the fridges stopped, the self-checkout screens blinked out, and the air felt instantly colder. A heartbeat later, the emergency lights kicked on, dim yellow bulbs that cast long shadows through the aisles. "Probably the wind," Brenda muttered, tapping her pen on the counter. "Happens every damn year." It wasn't windy, though. Outside, the night was still. Too still. I remember walking toward the big front windows and seeing the streetlights flickering too. Then, one by one, they went out, stretching down the street like a domino effect until everything outside was pitch black. Brenda picked up the store phone to call the power company, but the line was dead. My cell had no signal either. That wasn't unusual for that part of town. The signal was always spotty. But the timing felt wrong. Too perfect. There were only 2 customers left in the store then, a man and a little girl, maybe 7 or 8. She was dressed as a witch, her face painted green, holding a small pumpkin bucket. The man was tall, pale, and thin, wearing a dark coat. I'd seen them come in together maybe 15 minutes before. The thing that struck me at the time was how quiet they were. The girl hadn't said a word the whole time. Brenda sighed, setting down the dead phone. All right, everyone, looks like we're closing early. Let's get these folks out of here and lock up. The man nodded, but didn't say anything. He turned to the girl and motioned for her to follow. As they walked past me, she looked up, and I swear her eyes didn't look normal. Not in a monster movie way, just empty, like she was looking through me. Her hand was in his, but her arm hung limp, like she wasn't really walking under her own strength. When they passed through the sliding doors, the sensors didn't open them automatically. The power outage had disabled them. The man didn't even hesitate. He just pulled the door open with both hands. That shouldn't have been possible. Those doors were heavy, locked by hydraulics when power was out. He did it like it was nothing. The girl stepped outside first, followed by him, and as soon as they did, I caught a smell that made my stomach turn. It was faint but distinct, like wet earth and something rotting. Brenda must have smelled it too, because she made a face and said, "Good Lord, what is that?" By the time she finished her sentence, they were gone. I didn't see them walk toward a car or down the street. Just gone. Matt texted me around 10:05 saying he was on his way. The message came through even though I still had no bars. Be there in 10. You want Taco Bell? That was the last normal thing about that night. We finished closing up in silence, double-checked the doors, and by 10:20, I was standing outside in the parking lot. The whole town seemed swallowed in shadow. Even the houses across the road looked dark. There were no porch lights, no Halloween decorations glowing, no sound of trick-or-treaters anymore. The only thing I could hear was the crunch of gravel under my shoes and the wind moving through the trees. Then I noticed something else. Across the street, near the entrance to a narrow wooded trail that ran behind the store, was a single pumpkin sitting in the dirt. It was lit from inside, its flickering orange light barely visible in the dark. I hadn't noticed it when I came in that afternoon. It looked freshly carved, too, the edges clean and moist, the top sitting slightly askew. It wasn't anything special, just a simple face, triangle eyes, a jagged mouth. But the longer I stared at it, the more wrong it looked. The mouth wasn't smiling or frowning. It looked like it was stretched open in a silent scream. Headlights finally broke through the dark, and Matt's truck pulled up. I jumped in, eager to get out of there. He laughed when he saw my face. "Jesus, dude, you look like you saw a ghost." "Power's out," I said, buckling up. "Town's dark. Everything feels off." He shrugged, unbothered. "Halloween, man, the spirits are out. Let's get tacos and chill." We drove off, the truck's beams cutting through the night. As we passed the pumpkin, I turned to look at it again, and I swear it had moved. It was a few feet closer to the road than before. Matt didn't notice. He was too busy turning up the radio. Halfway to Taco Bell, the signal went dead. Not just static, dead silence. Matt smacked the dashboard. "Great. Damn old stereo." I glanced out the window and noticed the road ahead was completely empty. Normally, even that late, you'd see other cars, people leaving parties, cops patrolling. Not that night. Every street we passed was dark and lifeless. The Halloween decorations, the inflatables, the flickering lights, the plastic skeletons, all hung motionless. At one point, we passed a cul-de-sac with a dozen houses, each one pitch black, except for one. Its porch light was on, and a figure was standing there. I thought it was a person waiting for someone. But as we drove past, the porch light flickered, and in that flash, I saw that it wasn't a person. It was the same little girl from the store. She was standing perfectly still, her witch hat gone, her pale face turned toward the street. Her eyes looked darker now, hollow even, and her hands were clenched at her sides. "Matt, stop the truck." He slowed, confused. "What? Why?" "There was someone there," I said, pointing back. But when he turned to look, the porch was empty. The light was still on, swinging slightly like someone had just brushed past it. Matt laughed nervously. Dude, you're creeping me out. Probably just some kid. But I knew what I saw. We got our food and headed back toward my neighborhood. The power outage seemed to stretch across the entire town. No cops, no traffic lights, no people. It was eerie, like the world had quietly ended and we hadn't noticed yet. When we reached my street, I noticed something strange. My house, which sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, had a faint orange glow in front of it. As we got closer, I realized what it was. Another pumpkin, identical to the one outside the store. Your mom put that out? Matt asked. She's out of town, I said quietly. The pumpkin was sitting right in the middle of the driveway. Its carved face, the same jagged scream, flickered in the dark. Matt pulled in slowly, his headlights washing over it. I half expected it to melt under the light, but it just sat there. The smell hit us then, that same earthy rot I'd smelled earlier. I'm throwing that thing out, I said, climbing out. Matt followed me, phone flashlight in hand. I bent down to pick up the pumpkin and froze. It wasn't just carved. Inside, under the candle, something was stuffed into the pumpkin's hollow. Something that looked like fabric. Matt leaned closer. Dude, is that a doll? It was. A small, old-fashioned cloth doll burned on one side. The button eyes were missing, and where the mouth should have been was a jagged tear, like someone had ripped it open. We both jumped when the front door creaked open. I hadn't unlocked it. The porch light was off, the house dark, except for the faint candle glow reflecting on the glass. Matt raised his phone light toward the doorway, but it didn't reach far. Maybe your mom came back early? He whispered. No, I said. She would have called. Something moved inside the house. Just a shadow, quick, low to the ground, but definitely there. Matt backed up. Let's go, man. I don't like this. I wanted to listen, but something made me step forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. The air felt charged, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. I stepped up onto the porch, every instinct screaming to leave. The door was wide open now, the dark inside thick and unnatural. Hello? I called. A faint sound came from the living room. Not a voice. A whispering scrape, like something being dragged across the hardwood floor. Matt whispered behind me, please don't go in there, dude. But I did. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me again. Decay and wet dirt. The air was heavy, hard to breathe. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating the couch, the kitchen doorway, the hallway. Normal. Except for one thing. On the coffee table, sitting upright, was the little girl's pumpkin bucket from the store. It was filled to the brim with candy. But every wrapper was black, shiny, and unmarked. Matt's voice trembled behind me. We need to get the hell out of here. The scraping sound came again, louder now, closer, from the hallway leading to my bedroom. I took one step toward it, and something moved fast. A blur of dark hair and pale skin shot across the hall. Matt swore and ran for the door. Come on, man, but I couldn't move. I stared down the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Something was standing at the far end, half hidden in the shadow. Small, still. The girl. Her head tilted to the side, her mouth slightly open. Then she smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too wide, tearing up the sides like a slit. Blood, or something dark, dripped down her chin. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking. She started walking toward me. Not running, just walking, slow, deliberate, her bare feet dragging against the floor. Matt grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the house. We sprinted to the truck, slamming the doors just as the house lights flickered on for the first time that night. Through the windshield, I could see her standing in the doorway, watching. We tore out of there, tires screeching. Neither of us said a word for miles. When we finally stopped outside the next town over, we both just sat there, shaking. Matt threw up in the parking lot of a closed diner. We went to the police the next morning. They checked the house and found nothing. No pumpkin, no bucket, no footprints, nothing. But they did find something under my porch. A doll. Burned. Missing its eyes. They wrote it off as a Halloween prank. I moved out of that house within the month. My mom thought I was being dramatic, but I couldn't stay there. The smell, the silence, the way the lights flickered every night around the same time. It was too much. Matt and I didn't talk about it again after that. He said the less we said, the better. But every Halloween since then, I find things on my porch. Sometimes it's candy. Sometimes it's a pumpkin. Once it was that same little doll. And every year, without fail, Around midnight, I catch the faintest sound outside, soft footsteps on the driveway, followed by a child's voice whispering just loud enough to hear. Trick or treat. Story the end. It was Halloween night in 2019 when I learned that sometimes the scariest things aren't costumes or haunted houses, but the things that live quietly in the dark, watching, waiting, and wearing a human face just long enough for you to let your guard down. I was 26 at the time, recently divorced, and living in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. It was one of those quiet towns with a single main street, a grocery store that closed at 9, and a police department that was really just four guys who rotated night shifts. Everyone knew everyone, and Halloween was the one night the whole town seemed to come alive. I rented the upstairs of a two-story house on Walnut Street. The bottom half was occupied by a widow named Ruth, an older woman who spent most of her time knitting or watching old westerns. She was sweet, kept to herself, and had warned me when I moved in that Halloween night could get a little weird. I assumed she meant drunk teenagers egging houses or toilet papering trees, the usual small-town mischief. But there was something in her tone, a seriousness that stuck with me. That year, Halloween fell on a Thursday. The week had been gray and chilly, the kind of weather that makes the last few autumn leaves stick to wet sidewalks like dying embers. I'd taken the day off work, planning to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters and maybe go to a friend's bonfire later. The whole town decorated big for Halloween. Plastic skeletons dangled from porches, orange lights flickered from window frames, and fake gravestones dotted the lawns. But what I always loved most was the sound. The crunch of leaves under little shoes, the echo of laughter down the street, the occasional bark of a dog. Around 5:30 p.m., I set out 2 pumpkins I'd carved the night before and lit candles inside them. Ruth came out onto her porch and complimented them, though she didn't plan on giving out candy herself. "I don't do Halloween anymore," she said with a faint smile, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Too many memories." I didn't ask what she meant. She looked tired, like she'd seen too many Halloweens already. The first kids showed up right at 6. A group of little ones dressed as witches and superheroes. I'd bought 4 big bags of candy, and by 7:30 I was already halfway through. The street was alive with families walking, flashlights bobbing in the dark, parents chatting, and kids shouting, "Trick or treat!" It felt like one of those picture-perfect small-town nights you'd see in a movie. But around 8, something started to feel off. It wasn't sudden, not like a switch flipping. It was more like a slow fading of something familiar. The laughter grew distant, the street quieter. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. I looked up from my bowl of candy and noticed that most of the porch lights on my street had gone dark. A few families still walked past, but they were heading home, shivering in the cold. I started thinking maybe I'd turn off my light soon too. Then I saw him. He wasn't dressed like anyone else that night. While everyone else had colorful costumes, pirates, ghosts, vampires, this guy wore a dirty, long black coat and a blank white mask, the kind that covers your whole face with just holes for eyes. He stood across the street under a flickering streetlight, perfectly still. I thought maybe he was part of some teenager's prank. I even smiled a little, waiting for him to move, to jump out at some kids or make a loud noise. But he didn't move. He just stood there. When the next group of kids came up to my porch, I glanced back across the street. The man was gone. I figured he'd walked off, and I didn't think much of it. At least not then. By 8:45, the last of the trick-or-treaters had come and gone. I turned off my porch light, blew out the pumpkins, and went inside. I made a cup of coffee and sat near the window, looking out at the quiet street. Halloween always made me a little nostalgic, and I found myself thinking about the last one I'd spent with my ex-wife before we split up. The memory left a hollow feeling in my chest. I was about to turn on the TV when I saw movement outside again. It was that same figure, standing now on the sidewalk directly in front of my house. The mask looked even whiter in the dark, the kind of white that almost glows when the light hits it. He was just facing the house, not moving. My first thought was maybe it was a late-night prank. My second thought, less comfortable, was that maybe it wasn't. I set down my coffee and went to the front door, not opening it, just standing behind it and peering through the peephole. He was still there. I couldn't see his eyes through the mask, just two black holes staring up at the porch. He didn't seem to have candy or a bag, just that long coat that reached nearly to his boots. I stood there for a full minute, hoping he'd just move along. Then he did, but not in the way I expected. He started walking slowly down the sidewalk, then across the street toward Ruth's side of the house. I turned on my porch light again, partly to scare him off, partly so I could see better. But when I opened the door, he was gone again. I walked halfway down the steps, looking left and right. The street was empty except for the orange glow of the streetlight and a few candy wrappers blowing down the pavement. I told myself it was probably just some teenager trying to freak people out. Still, I locked the door that night, something I didn't normally do until I went to bed. Around 11:15, I was watching an old horror movie on TV when I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, slow footsteps. I froze, muting the sound. The footsteps creaked across the ceiling, steady, deliberate. My mind raced. No one lived above me. I was the upstairs tenant. Ruth's apartment was downstairs. I turned off the TV and listened harder. Another creak, and then another. I grabbed the small baseball bat I kept near the door and walked to the stairwell that led up to the attic. The house was old, with narrow stairs and wood that groaned under every step. The light at the top of the stairs was off, but faint moonlight filtered through a small attic window, enough to see that the door was closed. I took a deep breath and started up the stairs, one slow step at a time. The footsteps had stopped by the time I reached the top. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I turned the doorknob. It opened easily, revealing the dusty, empty attic. Old boxes lined one wall, covered in cobwebs. I stood there for a moment, scanning every corner. Nothing. I felt stupid. Maybe it was just the house settling, or maybe even a raccoon on the roof. I shut the door and started back down. Halfway to my apartment, I heard it again, the same footsteps, this time from directly behind the attic door. I froze. The sound wasn't faint or subtle. It was the sound of someone walking slowly, carefully, as if trying not to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then came 3 knocks on the other side of the door. Not hard, but deliberate. 1, 2, 3. I backed down the stairs, my heart hammering so hard I could barely think. I ran into my apartment, locked the door, and stood with my back against it, listening. Nothing followed. No more footsteps, no more knocking. Just silence. I called Ruth downstairs, but she didn't answer. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone's knocking from inside my attic? I could already imagine the look on their faces. So I sat up for another hour, every creak of the old house making my stomach twist. Finally, exhaustion won. I fell asleep on the couch with the lights on. The next morning, I went downstairs to check on Ruth. She answered the door with tired eyes and a mug of coffee in her hand. "You all right, honey?" she asked. I told her about the footsteps, about the knocking. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, maybe, she sighed and invited me in. Her living room was filled with old photos, the kind with faded edges. She sat down and motioned for me to sit too. "This house has always had visitors," she said softly. "Not ghosts, not exactly. Just people who come back. Every Halloween night." She told me that before she'd owned the house, it had belonged to her brother, Harold. He'd lived there with his wife and their teenage son back in the 1970s. One Halloween, Harold's wife had gone missing. Vanished without a trace. The police searched the woods, the nearby river, even drained the old quarry pond. They never found her. Harold drank himself to death 2 years later, and the son moved away. The house sat empty for nearly a decade before Ruth inherited it. "Every Halloween," she said, "someone walks the attic, just for one night." I didn't know what to say. She seemed calm, too calm, like she'd told this story many times. I left her apartment feeling unsettled, but a part of me didn't believe it. I figured maybe she was lonely, maybe her mind was slipping a bit. Old houses make noises, people imagine things. That night, October 31st passed into November 1st, and life went back to normal. For a while, anyway. About 2 weeks later, I was coming home late from work. The night was cold and clear, the air sharp with that November bite. When I got to my house, I noticed something strange. One of the pumpkins I'd left on the porch, long since rotted, had been moved. It was sitting on the top step now, perfectly centered with something tucked inside. I leaned closer. It was a mask. A white mask, just like the one the man had been wearing that night. I stared at it for a long time, my breath fogging in the air. I picked it up with a trembling hand. The inside smelled faintly of damp earth. There was something smeared across the bottom. Mud, or maybe old makeup. I threw it into the garbage can and went inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I told Ruth about the mask. She looked genuinely frightened this time. "You shouldn't have touched it," she whispered. "They notice when you touch things they leave behind." She didn't explain what she meant, and I didn't ask. I just left for work, trying to shake the conversation from my mind. But I couldn't. Over the next week, I started noticing small things out of place. My keys moved from the table to the counter. My phone charger unplugged and coiled neatly on the floor. Once I came home to find the back door unlocked, even though I never used it. And always at night I'd hear faint creaking above me. Not every night, but enough that it made my stomach knot whenever the sun went down. On November 12th, I came home to find Ruth's downstairs lights off. Her curtains were open, and through the window, I could see her knitting chair empty. I knocked on her door. No answer. Her car was in the driveway, so I figured she must have gone to bed early. I went upstairs, trying not to think about how quiet the house felt. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of sirens. I looked outside to see red and blue lights flashing across the street. 2 police cars and an ambulance parked out front. I ran downstairs. One of the officers stopped me at the porch. "You live here?" he asked. I nodded. He looked at me grimly. "I'm sorry, but the woman downstairs, Miss Ruth, she's passed away. They said she died in her sleep, natural causes." I was heartbroken. She'd been like a grandmother to me. But when they carried her body out on the stretcher, something strange caught my eye. Her right hand was clenched tightly around something. I saw it just long enough to recognize it, a small folded piece of paper. I never found out what it said. The coroner took it with her. After she died, the landlord told me I could stay as long as I wanted, though I'd be the only tenant for a while. The first few weeks after her funeral were eerily quiet. I tried to convince myself that whatever had happened before Halloween was just weird timing, stress, or coincidence. I started working longer hours, anything to keep myself from being home after dark. But on the evening of December 3rd, I came home and saw it again. The mask, sitting on my front step, clean this time as if brand new. I stood there for a long time, staring at it in the cold. Then I picked it up and threw it straight into the garbage bin, slamming the lid shut. That night, at exactly 3:14 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I grabbed the bat again, my hands slick with sweat. I could see the shadow under the door. Someone was standing there. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer, just the sound of slow breathing. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and swung the bat. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I walked through the apartment, turning on every light. Nothing was disturbed. No doors open, no windows broken. But when I got to the living room, my stomach dropped. The mask was on my coffee table, the same white mask staring up at me, perfectly placed, as if someone had set it there while I slept. I left the house that night and drove to a motel 20 miles away. I didn't go back until morning. When I returned, the mask was gone. I moved out by the end of that week. For a while, I stayed with a friend in Scranton. I tried to move on. I told myself it was probably just some sick prank by local kids, that maybe Ruth's death had shaken me more than I realized. But then, one night in March, I got a call from my old landlord. He sounded shaken. "You might want to hear this," he said. "The new tenant, the one who moved into your old unit, left in the middle of the night, said she woke up to someone standing in the corner of her room wearing a white mask." I didn't respond. I just thanked him and hung up. I never went back to that town again. To this day, I still think about that Halloween. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was human at all, or if maybe Ruth was right, that the house had visitors who came back every year. But what really keeps me up at night is the thought that maybe it wasn't the house at all. Maybe it followed me. Last October, I was living in Ohio in a small apartment near the city. Halloween night came and went without much excitement. Around 9 p.m., I stepped out onto my balcony to smoke. Down below, a few kids were still trick-or-treating, their costumes glowing in the streetlights. I smiled, feeling almost normal again. Then I looked across the street. Under a lamppost at the edge of the shadows stood someone wearing a long black coat and a white mask, perfectly still, facing my building. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, watching. After what felt like an eternity, the figure turned slowly and walked away into the dark. That was a year ago. Halloween's coming again soon, and I still live in the same place. I keep my lights off now. I don't decorate, don't hand out candy, those don't even answer the door, because deep down I know he's still out there somewhere. And one of these nights, maybe not even on Halloween, even on Halloween, he's going to stop walking away. He's going to come back to my door. And this time, I don't think he's going to leave. Story the end. It was one of those crisp October evenings in rural Pennsylvania, the kind where the air feels sharper and the shadows seem to lean just a little closer. I was 16, living with my parents in a modest house on the outskirts of a sleepy town called Millersville. My friends and I had been looking forward to Halloween for weeks, and that year we decided to do something different, something that would make the night unforgettable. We had heard rumors about the old Whitaker farm, abandoned for decades, sitting at the edge of town, shrouded in overgrown fields and dark woods. Locals whispered that the place was cursed, that strange things had happened there, though no one could provide clear evidence. For us, that was the attraction. On Halloween night, with bags of candy forgotten in our anticipation, my friends and I decided to go explore it. The sun had just set, leaving streaks of blood red and orange across the horizon. We were four: me, Jason, Katie, and Mark. We parked my dad's old pickup at the edge of the forest and made our way toward the farm. The path was barely more than a dirt trail, overgrown with weeds, with the wind rustling through the skeletal branches of the trees. Our flashlights cut through the darkness in uneven beams, revealing glimpses of the old barn and the crumbling farmhouse beyond. As we approached, a sense of unease settled over me. The farmhouse looked worse than I expected. Its roof sagged, the windows were black holes, and the door hung crooked on rusty hinges. The barn, though slightly more intact, gave off an oppressive aura, as if it were waiting for someone foolish enough to enter. But we laughed it off, trying to mask the nervous tension that hung in the air like smoke. Katie dared us to go inside the house. "It's Halloween," she said, her voice wavering between excitement and fear. "If we chicken out now, we'll regret it forever." So, one by one, we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the smell of rot and mold almost unbearable. Our footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and the walls seemed to groan under their own weight. In the main room, we found old furniture covered with yellowed sheets. There were photographs on the walls, though most were faded or torn. One picture caught my eye. A family of four, smiling in front of the farmhouse, the same farmhouse we were standing in. The father's eyes, though, seemed off. It wasn't just the grain of the photo. There was something almost angry in them, a coldness that made my stomach twist. We split up to explore further. Jason and Mark went upstairs, while Katie and I stayed downstairs. The stairs creaked under their weight, each step sounding like a scream in the silence. I tried to focus on the furniture and the old books scattered around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, but whenever I turned, there was nothing there. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft at first, barely audible, coming from the hallway behind the kitchen. "Get out," it said. I froze. Katie laughed nervously, insisting it was the wind or the house settling, but I knew what I heard. My heart was pounding, and I could see her face blanching as well. We decided to follow the sound to see if the others had heard anything. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Get out now." It seemed to swirl around us, echoing off the walls. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a cold draft brush past me, carrying the scent of decay. Katie grabbed my arm, and we hurried toward the stairs, calling for Jason and Mark. But the staircase was empty. There was no sign of them. Panic set in. We shouted their names, our voices trembling, but the only response was the creaking of the floorboards and the whisper, growing louder, more insistent. "Get out! Leave! Now!" The words didn't feel like a warning. They felt like a threat. I ran to the door, yanking it open, and stumbled into the yard. Katie was right behind me, gasping for air, but Jason and Mark were nowhere to be seen. The barn was the last place they could have gone. We ran toward it, flashlights sweeping the interior, calling their names. The barn was dark, but something moved in the shadows. My flashlight caught it for a split second. A figure standing at the far end, motionless. I froze, and the figure slowly turned. It wasn't Jason or Mark. Its face was pale, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I screamed, and the figure lunged. I stumbled back, and Katie screamed too. Then it vanished. Just like that, gone. My heart was racing, adrenaline flooding my veins. We ran out of the barn and into the open fields, calling for help, but the town was a mile away. We didn't see Jason and Mark again that night. When we finally made it to a neighbor's house, we told them what happened. They looked at us like we were crazy, but they said the Whitaker farm had a history. Decades ago, the family that lived there had been murdered. 4 people, the exact number of us. The farm had been abandoned ever since, left to rot, and locals avoided it at all costs. Some claimed the spirits of the family lingered, trapped by violence and fear. We called the police the next day. They searched the farm, but there was no sign of Jason or Mark, no footprints, no evidence that anyone else had been there. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. My parents didn't believe me when I told them, and neither did the authorities, chalking it up to a Halloween prank gone wrong. But Katie and I knew what we saw. The whispers, the shadowy figure, the way the house seemed alive with malevolence, it was real. Weeks turned into months, and there was still no sign of our friends. Families of missing persons were usually contacted, but for some reason there were no reports matching their disappearance. It was as if the Whitaker farm had swallowed them whole. Katie moved away shortly after, and I was left alone with the memory, haunted by the empty spaces where my friends should have been. Years later, I returned to Millersville. The town hadn't changed much, but the Whitaker farm was different. The house had finally collapsed, reduced to a pile of rubble, and the barn had partially burned. Locals said it had been struck by lightning, but I knew better. Whatever had been there wasn't gone. It never really leaves. I stood at the edge of the field, feeling that same chill in the air, and for a moment I thought I saw figures in the shadows. 4 figures, just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. Even now, decades later, I hear whispers sometimes when the wind is right, a voice calling my name, soft but insistent. Get out, now. And I know that some things, some horrors, never truly leave. They're waiting, patient and hungry, just beyond the edge of light. I've tried to forget. I've tried to live a normal life, to move on from that night. But Halloween always brings it back. The air turns crisp, the shadows grow longer, and I feel that same oppressive weight in the darkness. I know what I heard, what I saw, and I know the Whitaker farm is not just a story. It's a warning. And every Halloween, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever see Jason and Mark again, or if they were already claimed by something far older and far darker than we could ever understand. The thing about fear, I've learned, is that it doesn't need to show itself fully to be real. The smallest sound, the tiniest movement in the corner of your eye, the whisper carried on the wind, these are enough to remind you that you are never truly safe. And in Millersville, in the shadow of the Whitaker farm, we learned that the hard way. Halloween is supposed to be fun, a night of costumes and candy and laughter. But sometimes it's a reminder of something far more sinister, something that waits patiently for the unwary, for the curious, for the foolish. I still drive by the field on my way to work sometimes. Even with the farm gone, there's a lingering presence, shadows that shouldn't be there, shapes that disappear when you look directly at them. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, I hear it again, the whisper. Get out. Now. I never stop running when I hear it. I never stop looking over my shoulder, because I know deep down that some doors once opened can never truly be closed. And some friends, once lost, are never found. Story the end. It started as an ordinary October evening in a small suburban town in Pennsylvania. The kind of town where Halloween wasn't just a day, it was a season. People carved pumpkins on their porches as the sun dipped below the horizon. Children raced down sidewalks in elaborate costumes, and the air smelled faintly of crisp leaves, sugar, and candle wax. I had just moved into a modest 2-story house at the end of Maplewood Drive, a quiet street lined with old oaks that were losing their leaves in fiery reds and golds. I was alone in the house for the first Halloween since I'd moved from Philadelphia. My parents visiting relatives for the holiday, leaving me with nothing but the eerie anticipation of my first adult Halloween alone. I spent the early evening out handing candy to trick-or-treaters. It was a steady stream of little ghouls and superheroes, and I got into the rhythm of greeting them at the door, laughing at some of the over-the-top costumes and keeping my porch light on as a beacon of warmth. Around 8:30, the street began to thin out. The sky was a deep indigo, the last of the children's laughter fading down the street as their parents shepherded them home. I closed the door and locked it, feeling a mixture of relief and unease. That's when I first noticed it, a faint scratching sound coming from the backyard. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or some other nocturnal animal, which wasn't uncommon given the wooded area behind my yard. I went to the window and peered out, but the shadows of the trees made it hard to see anything clearly. The scratching grew more deliberate, closer now, as if someone or something was testing the perimeter. I rationalized it in my head. Old houses creak, branches scrape against siding, animals wander. But the sound had a rhythm, a pause that felt almost like a signal, as if it was waiting for me to react. I tried to ignore it, retreating to the living room with a book, but the noise persisted. Every few minutes, it came again, a slow, dragging sound against the wooden fence that separated my backyard from the dense tree line. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I locked the sliding glass door again and drew the curtains. The rational part of me kept whispering that it was nothing, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But a pit of unease had settled in my stomach, the kind that tightens when you know something isn't right, even if you can't see it yet. Around 10 p.m., I decided to finally investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped into the backyard, my breath visible in the chilly night air. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating fallen leaves and a faint mist that had begun to settle near the tree line. At first, there was nothing, just the gentle sway of branches in the wind. Then I noticed the footprints. They were muddy, fresh, leading from the edge of the trees toward my house, circling around the side and back to the fence. The pattern didn't make sense. Whoever, or whatever, was out there hadn't tried to hide their presence. They were deliberate, almost mocking. I froze for a moment, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The rational part of me screamed to go back inside, but curiosity, or fear-driven adrenaline, pushed me to follow the prints. The further I walked, the more I realized something was off. The prints didn't resemble any normal shoe pattern I recognized. They were elongated, narrow, with deep grooves that almost looked clawed, yet distinctly human in shape. I knelt down to inspect them, shining the flashlight closer. That's when I heard it, a low, wet, guttural growl coming from the far corner of the yard near the shed. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see it, but I couldn't stop myself. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a glimpse of movement. A shadowy figure crouched low to the ground. My first instinct was to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure seemed to dissolve into the darkness the moment I focused on it, but the sound didn't stop. It began moving around the yard in a slow, stalking pattern, making no effort to hide. I bolted back inside, slamming the door and locking it again, heart hammering. My hands shook as I tried to convince myself it was some prankster from the neighborhood, but the thought quickly faded. Who would be out here at almost 10:30 p.m., alone with no friends to impress, making guttural growls in a backyard? I called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later, their patrol lights cutting through the darkness of my quiet street. They walked the perimeter with flashlights, checking the yard, the trees, even the shed. There were no signs of anyone. They said it was probably just a raccoon or some local kids playing a Halloween joke, but their uneasy glances told me they didn't believe it either. They left, promising to drive by every hour. I locked every door and window, but sleep didn't come. Every creak of the house, every distant rustle outside made me jump. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch, leaving a nightlight on in the living room. That's when the nightmare truly began. I woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing in the hallway outside the living room. My heart stopped. I was alone, yet the footsteps didn't belong to me. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands, whispering my location. The footsteps stopped, I strained my ears, silence stretching on, oppressive and heavy. Then I heard the scratching again, but this time it was coming from inside the house, soft, deliberate, like fingernails on wood. I hid behind the couch, clutching my phone. The scratching moved closer, circling the room, pausing occasionally. Then I heard a whisper, so faint I could barely make out the words, "Why are you here?" I froze. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. Someone or something was in my house. I thought about running to the kitchen to grab a knife, but the rational part of me knew any sudden movement could trigger an encounter I might not survive. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably only minutes. Then silence. My phone vibrated with the police arriving. Only, when they entered, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence of anyone ever being inside. I explained the whispers, the footsteps, the scratching, but all they could do was take my statement and suggest I stay with a friend until Halloween was over. I refused. I wanted to see this through. Over the next few nights, strange things escalated. Objects in my home shifted positions. My keys were never where I left them. The kitchen knives were arranged differently. I began seeing glimpses of a figure in the corner of my eye, a tall, shadowy man, always watching, never moving when confronted. My friends thought I was exaggerating, attributing it to stress or imagination, but the fear was tangible. Something was inside the house, lingering, studying me. The climax came on Halloween night itself. I had spent the evening nervously watching the door, but at around 11:45 p.m., the power went out. Darkness enveloped the house, and the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the living room. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the fuse box, but as I reached it, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, shining the beam into the darkness. The shadow was there, crouched low, impossibly still. I screamed, the figure rising impossibly fast, towering over me. It had no discernible features, just an absence, a void where a face should be. My vision blurred, my legs froze. It tilted its head, listening, then whispered again, "You shouldn't be here." I bolted, crashing through the kitchen and out the front door into the cold night. I ran down the street, adrenaline carrying me past neighbor after neighbor's lit homes, past carved pumpkins staring blankly in the dark. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, panting, soaked with sweat and trembling. I explained everything, my fear, the figure, the whispers. They took my statement and finally called a patrol to my house, but when we returned, it was as if nothing had happened. My doors were locked, my windows intact, no signs of disturbance. Yet I knew what I had seen. I never spent another Halloween alone after that. I moved back in with my parents, leaving the house on Maplewood Drive vacant. Local lore quickly developed among the few neighbors who remembered the strange occurrences. Some claimed they'd seen a tall shadow in the windows on Halloween nights, watching silently, waiting. Others said the house had an oppressive aura, something heavy that pressed down when you entered. Years later, I learned something that chilled me to the bone. The previous owner of the house had lived there for decades and had an obsession with Halloween. He was found dead one October in the same hallway where I first saw the shadow, with no explanation. The coroner ruled it natural causes, but the local police never found a satisfactory answer for the neighbors who claimed to hear scratching and whispers before he died. Every Halloween since, people avoided that street. Children were warned never to knock on that house, and every year, just after midnight, those who walked past the yard claimed to see a tall figure crouching among the oaks, watching, waiting for someone foolish enough to be alone. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Sleep paralysis, imagination, stress, but I know the truth. There's something tied to that house, something that awakens on Halloween, drawn to those who are alone. I've never returned, and I never will. The memory of that figure, the silent, featureless presence, whispering in the dark, haunts me still. Every October, when the wind carries the scent of leaves and candle wax, I remember the scratching, the footsteps, the low, guttural growl, and I pray I never encounter it again. Even now, years later, the memory is vivid. The way the shadow moved, the unnatural silence that fell whenever it was near, the way it knew I was alone. Some things aren't meant to be confronted. Some horrors are best left in the darkness, in the old houses at the end of quiet streets, waiting for the next unlucky soul. Story the end.